From LA to Piscataway, you've come to the right place to talk all things Big Ten. Welcome to Big Ten Ted Live.
And from LA to Piscataway, it is early signing day. Happy early signing day to all of you that celebrate. And trust me, I'm sure all of you celebrate, especially if you had a great signing day, especially if your team was able to reel in all of the 4 stars and 5 stars that you thought they could. If maybe things didn't go your way, it's still going to be a good day. We got a lot to talk about, folks. Okay, maybe I don't have the resources as our buddies in Chicago at the Big Ten Network, all right? That was a great 4-hour special. I watched every minute of it here today. But in terms of a Big Ten early signing day special from a conference perspective, we might be getting the silver medal. We've got all kind of guests from all kinds of different schools across this conference. Here is the lineup for tonight. We are going to be joined by Tim Prangley from the Trojan Conquest Show. Going to be talking about all things USC. We're going to be joined by John Johnston of Coronation. Has anything happened in Nebraska right this week? We're going to be talking to him tonight. We're going to be talking to Ryan Herrings from Locked On Badgers. We're going to be talking to Roman Tomashoff, Sports Illustrated, and Locked On Huskies. That's always a fun conversation. We'll be talking Washington recruiting. And then we're going to be talking to Doug Scott, host of the QB11 show. We've got Richie Schneiderite from Rivals. He covers all things Rutgers and Penn State. We've got 7 of the top 11 teams that finished in the top 11. We've got those guests on our show tonight. It is going to be a jam-packed program. I say this every time. We've got a jam-packed program, which has been a lot lately. If you want to make sure that your comment or your question to one of the guests about a recruiting class, to make sure it gets on the air, the best way to do that is to hit that $ and attach a donation to your comment. I can sort those. I can make sure that those get on. So if you want to make sure it gets on, it's going to be a busy night. We're going to be going from guest to guest to guest. Make sure you do that. What a day. What a day. This was kind of a new day, the start of a new day with these 4 schools. This is really, in terms of when I was watching the Big Ten Network special during the day, this was really the start of it. This was really the start of these teams in the Big Ten. I know Washington still has a playoff game to play. I know USC still has a bowl game, the Holiday Bowl, coming up against Louisville. I know Oregon's playing in the Fiesta Bowl. UCLA's done, so they're full Big Ten right now, whether Chip Kelly likes the format or not. This is a reality now. So a little bit of an adjustment, right? Just seeing those logos and those colors and those coaches on the Big Ten Network. But yeah, it's going to be a great. It's going to be great having them in the conference, and it's going to be great talking to all of the hosts around the conference here this evening. Before we get into our host, and our first one is going to be Tim Prangley from the Trojan Conquest, the first thing I do want to talk about is my overview, my take on everything from the macro level of the Big Ten. It's a new day. It's a different day in the Big Ten. It's early signing day with a lot of these schools. And when I look at this thing from 10,000 feet, there's a lot of change, but yet there's a lot of things that are still the same. You still need to recruit really good players. Okay, for all of the talk about the transfer portal, you still need to recruit at a high level. Look at the teams that are contending for national championship after national championship every single year. These aren't teams that exactly rank the highest in transfer portal rankings because they rank the highest in recruiting rankings. The foundation, the roots of your program still lies on signing day. Before I break down any teams or headlines or storylines within early signing day, here's what I want to talk about first. We need to move this thing back, okay? Because from 1 year from now, on early signing day, we're going to be playing a first-round college football playoff game in the 12-team college football playoff. Like, there's so much jammed into December now. Okay, you've got transfers, you've got bowls, and now playoffs, right? That's going to be moved up. I think 1 year it's going to be December 19th, that first Friday game. So I just think signing day is the thing. I understand why they have it in December, but that's a thing that needs to move back, I think, to February. Like, this is a 24/7, 365 profession, college football coaching. I know that. I understand that, but I think a lot of people agree with me, and this thing needs to get pushed back, right? I don't think you're going to change having transfers in December just by the way of when the season ends and how the calendar works. I think that fits in December. But just having all of that, including recruiting in December, I just don't think it's going to work going forward. All right, let's get into some of these storylines on some of these programs across the Big Ten Conference. First one I want to talk about is you can't talk about signing day unless you talk about Dylan Raiola and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Of course, we've been talking about this for a solid week. We've been talking about this for a solid week and a half. We know how good of a player and how much of a difference maker he is going to make in Lincoln, Nebraska. We know that. We get that. But I believe the last two classes for Nebraska has really laid the foundation. I compared it to a cake. There's many layers and many parts to a cake, and Dylan is the icing on the cake. You look at last year's class that Matt Rule was able to solidify. A lot of those freshmen played this year. Jalen Lloyd played pretty good. Malachi Coleman got onto the field at wide receiver. Look at the defensive line. Guys like Cameron Lenhart and Princewell Uman Mielen. Like, there's a lot of guys that played and played pretty decently when they were in there. And then you look at this year, Carter Nelson playing 8-man football up in Ainsworth, Nebraska. Like, you look at Thomas Fedoni, who's playing pretty good right now at the tight end position for the Huskers. And then you look at Carter Nelson, who's a very athletic, might have to beef up a little bit, might have to put on a little bit more weight if they want to use him in more run blocking situations. But in terms of a pass catcher, in terms of being athletic, this could be pretty good back-to-back tight ends for Nebraska. Iowa's still tight end U, but Nebraska may be catching up just a little bit. I'm going to insert something quickly about the Iowa Hawkeyes. Their top 8 players in the state, 7 of them are going to be playing in Iowa City, Iowa. Who's the one? It's number 1. For the second consecutive season, the number 1 player in the state of Iowa is not going to be playing for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Remember last year, it was Caden Proctor, pretty close to signing day, flipped his commitment to Alabama, and he's playing right now for the Crimson Tide. This year, it's Grant Bricks. Now, it's not one of these last couple of week flips. He's been committed to Nebraska for a long period of time, but this is a second year in a row. Not only the top player, but an offensive lineman. That's a position that Iowa has felt pretty darn good about in the past, right? They've developed really good offensive linemen. But for the second straight year, they're going somewhere else, this time across the river over to Nebraska. All right, let's move on and talk about the Buckeyes of Ohio State. This is a program that took a couple of hits in recruiting. We talk about 5-star defensive lineman Justin Scott, who a couple of weeks, maybe a month, something like that ago, he flipped his commitment from Ohio State to the University of Miami, and the picture he posted on social media had a wad of cash. So we all know kind of what drove that, and that's kind of what Miami really pushes down there, is backing the Brinks truck up and trying to dump some NIL money to try to get these guys down to South Florida. But they lost him, and then on signing day, they lost Jeremiah McClellan, a 4-star wide receiver making his way to Eugene, Oregon. We'll touch more on that here in just a little bit, but that may seem like a hit, maybe for a lot of other programs. But for a program like Ohio State, you can still remain the top recruiting class in the Big Ten. Because for them, there's a reason why they're called wide receiver U. There's a reason why they are where they're at. Because even though they lose a high type of 4-star player like a Jeremiah McClellan, you still got Jeremiah Smith, who is in that Marvin Harrison Jr. type of territory, and you still got Mylan Graham, 2 5-star wide receivers making their way to Columbus, Ohio. These guys are fantastic, especially Jeremiah Smith. And then you looked back to last year, right? They recruited a bunch of great wide receivers. You look at Carnell Tate, you look at Brandon Innes as well from a season ago, and Ohio State. They're doing just fine at the wide receiver position. They're always going to be doing just fine at the wide receiver position as well. And then you kind of factor in Noland as well. What a great name for a quarterback, high 4-star type of kid, going to be making his way to Columbus, Ohio. The top class in the Big Ten, a top 5 class nationally. The Buckeyes, yeah, you're fine. You're going to be doing all right. Let's talk about that school that took away Jeremiah McClellan. Let's talk about the Oregon Ducks. Wow. This was last year. This was a top 10 recruiting class from Dan Lanning. This year it was slated again to be a top 10 recruiting class before they flipped 2 4-star wide receivers on signing day. We just talked about Jeremiah McClellan flipping from Ohio State to Oregon. Ryan Pelham flipping from USC over to the Ducks as well. 2 big-time additions at the wide receiver position. And this was a class where some of their top players were on the defensive side of the ball. But to be able to really pad out that wide receiver room for the future is big time for Dan Lanning. And Dan Lanning is quickly establishing himself as one of the very best recruiters, maybe not only in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. That's kind of where he made a name for himself. That's kind of where he cut his teeth as a GA, as a recruiter. That's where he kind of rose up the ranks as being a good, great, elite type of recruiter, and you're really seeing that at Oregon, a top 5 class in the country right now. And defense, right? This is a team that I think needs to get a little bit better on the defensive side of the football. You look at Aiden Breland from Mater Dei, right? A big-time high school in the state of California, 6'5", 290. The number 16 player in the country, Elijah Rushing out of Tucson, Arizona at 6'6", 251. Big, agile, coming off the edge. That's going to be dangerous. The number 17 player in the country. You look at Braden Platt out of Yelm, Washington, the number 53 player in the country, the top player in that state as well at linebacker. This is a team in the Oregon Ducks that is getting it. We know they're great at offense, right? It seems like no matter who the coach has been, from Chip Kelly, Mario Cristobal, Dan Lanning, they've always been really, really good on the offensive side of the ball, but now defense. Last year, there was a lot of skill positions. Mateo Uyunglele, right, was on the defense. He got some action this season, and now they're really loading up on defense once again as well. You know, something that a lot of people ask when they talk about signing, who's going to get in there? Who's going to play right away? A guy that I really look at is Quentin Martin, coming into Penn State, 4-star running back. He can do it all. He can return kicks. He can run the ball up the middle. They split him out wide in screens and sweeps and everything. He can do so many things on the football field, being versatile at a skill position like wide receiver or running back. I think that really helps you get on the field earlier at a program like a Penn State or some of these other bigger programs. I think definitely Quentin Martin can be that guy as well. Let's talk about the Michigan Wolverines. We know that this offseason has the potential to be a little bit of a roller coaster for Michigan, but they're really zeroing in on, and they've got commitments and signees from 2 really good players as well. Is it McCarthy and Corum 2.0? Jaden Davis, right? He's going to benefit from, I think, a year or 2 learning and developing, and we don't know who the coach is going to be. We don't know who the coordinator is going to be. I think that's still up in the air right now. Jordan Marshall is there as well at the running back position. I think these are 2 guys that the Michigan Wolverines are really going to zero in on, and I could see them as the future. Remember, McCarthy and Corum were not transfers. They were recruited, right? This is a Michigan program. They load up on 4-stars. Okay, they're about around the number 15 spot in these national recruiting rankings. So, and then they turn that 4-star talent on paper in recruiting classes at the high school level, and they turned it into 5-star all-conference, all-American type of players as well on the offensive side of the ball. If everything kind of stays together somewhat in Michigan, I could see these guys maybe a couple of years from now. I think both of them, it might be a little bit more difficult to see the field in their freshman season, considering the depth that is there at a program like Michigan. But I could definitely see these guys really getting in on the act and being a big part of things right away. A couple of teams that I just want to touch on very quickly. Purdue, Coy Beasley and Luke Williams back there in that defensive secondary. You got Dylan Thieneman, who had a really good freshman year this last year. I could see them really building up in the defensive secondary as well. It's a top 30 class for Ryan Walters. at Purdue. They're really building something. They might have their quarterback of the future as well in Marcus Davia, right? Getting back down to that Texas pipeline like Drew Brees. The cradle of quarterbacks could have their next member. UCLA, I'm going to finish with them. 0 defensive line recruits. We know that Chip Kelly isn't the greatest recruiter in the world. We know Chip Kelly is a guy that maybe wants to go into the portal, and he said we're going to try to address the defensive line need. But we said it. I think this is a program right now, and you need to be able to build at the recruiting level. You can't rely, especially in the Big Ten, on the D-line. You need that type of guys. We'll see if there's guys in the portal for UCLA that are available. But, man, they need to invest a little bit more in high school recruiting. It's a new age. It's a new day in the Big Ten, and today might be the day where teams start building their future in this conference. Boy, it's really fun. It's really fun to be able to see what exactly is going on here right now. So let's get to some comments here before we get into our first guest, and we wait for some guests to file in. Andrew Anderson is here. Go Big Red. Our guy Trojan Blade is in here tonight as well. We got Big Ten Ted Champions Club member Big Ten Johnny is in the house here tonight. Kraken Hawk, our guy, always willing to spice up the chat. Here he is. Bow down tonight. Michigan versus the world is here tonight as well. And yes, I see that in the chat. I do know about the notice of allegations with Michigan. There's a lot to really, there's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of dominoes that I think has to fall as that story kind of develops. It dropped on a day where, yeah, maybe there's a lot of other stuff going on, right, for folks like myself. But yeah, we'll see what happens with that as well. It's going to be very interesting to see exactly how this goes as well. Rick Olson saying it's a good day. It's a great day to be a Duck. Boy, I tell you what Oregon's doing. Oregon's doing some big time stuff. Oregon is doing some big time stuff right now in recruiting. They got a guy at their head coach position in Dan Lanning that's doing some great things. Some great things right now. So, yeah, Oregon's going to be, they are going to have to be dealt with, folks. Like we know how they were 2 losses against Washington away from probably going to the college football playoff. 2 losses from getting to that point. Of course, you got to win those games. You know, those Oregon-Washington games have been so close the last few years, the DeBoer and Lanning era. You know, what I really love to see, these coaching battles. That's what I really love to see. And Lanning and DeBoer, they both came in at the same time. They're really, really good coaches. Style-wise, philosophy-wise, they might be a little bit different, but I think that's what makes this a little bit fun. I think that is going to be a great rivalry for the long term as both teams move to the Big Ten. I believe that this is, and Dan and Kalen going at it. I think Kalen's going to be more, and we'll kind of talk about this here as we go along when we talk about Oregon and we talk about Washington. I think Washington's going to be more, because right now they're about middle of the road in terms of the signing class and recruiting. And if they want to stay at that level, I think they're going to have to go a little bit more to the transfer portal. They're doing some good things. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a top 30, top 35 class in the country coming into Seattle. But you look at guys like Michael Penix Jr. and some of these other guys have been transfers. But then you look at a guy like Roma Dunze. Roma Dunze, one of the best wide receivers in the country, right, was recruited to here. So, yeah, Washington is a very interesting case study as well there. David checking in here today. Go Ducks. We've got some Ducks fans here today. Our guy Hummus Hero representing Ohio State, saying Oregon finished really strong. Yeah, they were going to be a top 10 class. And then you add in those 2 4-star wide receivers, and Oregon is right in a great spot right now as well. Our guy Gary, Penn State fan. Gary, we're gonna have rivals Richie Schneiderite kind of coming by a little bit later to talk Penn State's recruiting class. So stay tuned for that as well. Right now, Washington, according to Michigan, I know things are fluid. They were 9th or 10th, somewhere in there, about middle of the road in the Big Ten. So that's kind of where the Washington Huskies really stand here right now. All right, we're going to kind of shift things around a little bit, because when you talk about recruiting here, you got it right now, and you talk about early signing day, there's really only one thing we have been talking about right now, and it's been the University of Nebraska. So that's where our first guest is going to come in here right now, and it's a guy I've wanted to talk to here for a while. It is my guy John Johnston from Coordination. John, how are you doing this evening? I know of absolutely nothing that has gone on with your fan base here for the last week or so.
Well, it's been a boring off season so far. We're not going to a bowl and everybody's quiet, except that, I don't know. It's been kind of wild, hasn't it?
It's been a crazy week. It's been a crazy week in Huskerland, man. All right, let's dive into this, because it was a crazy, crazy day. Let's talk first about Dylan Raiola, right? Everybody wants to talk about it, right? This is big, right? And of course you guys know that. That's not any new information to you. But I believe he's just a part of things that are happening. I thought Matt Rule did a really good job finishing his class last year. And then you look at Carter Nelson, right? You look at Grant Bricks. We'll kind of break down some individual players right now. But how big is Dylan Raiola for the future? And also, how good, in your opinion, is this class that's coming in with Dylan in 2024?
Well, it's big news. We get that he's a legacy commit. His family is, Nebraska. But the fact that, listen, I'm really blunt about our program. We've sucked. I mean, we're the worst Power 5 program in the nation right now, and we still didn't go to a bowl game this last year. So for us to get like a 5-star recruit, some services rank him number 1 quarterback, some don't, whatever. For him to even come to Nebraska, I think is a pretty big, I think it's a sign that people believe in what Matt Rule is going to do and what he's doing. I don't think a player like Dylan Raiola would take a chance on sacrificing what may be a big ticket for being a quarterback in the NFL just to, make his dad or his uncle happy. That would be really dumb. So I think there's things going on there that he sees and that he feels comfortable with, and God help us, we need quarterbacks.
Oh man, I tell you now you correct me if I'm wrong, because they're saying that this is the highest rated recruit, I believe, all time in the rankings era for Nebraska. I think Marlon Lucky was kind of thrown in, right, as some other players who were kind of in this range as well. But I know they say everybody goes back pre-rankings era. Tommy Frazier, of course, was highly regarded and everything as well. All right, let's get into kind of some of these other players in this Nebraska class as well. Let's talk about Carter Nelson playing 8-man football. What is it up there in north central-ish Nebraska up there? You watch him on tape. And man amongst boys isn't even right. It's like Godzilla amongst boys. It really seems like that. He's really kind of out of his league out there. It seems to me like he needs to bulk up a little bit to really play that Big Ten tight end type of role. I think he's maybe just north of 200 right now. What do you kind of see when you look at Carter Nelson?
Well, I mean, he's coming in with. We have Thomas Fidone still there. Yep. We didn't lose hardly anybody to the transfer portal. I mean, minimal. And I think Carter Nelson, the key with him out of Ainsworth, which I don't even remember ever going to Ainsworth in my life. But my understanding at Ainsworth is they basically said he can do anything. He played quarterback, he punted the ball, he returned the ball, he played tight end. He's coming in at a tight end. I don't know. There's enough players. I mean, we signed 29 people in this class. We already had a scholarship limit. We have we have people coming in on the transfer portal. So you kind of wonder where they're going to put everybody. But Carter Nelson was a big get for him, entertained going to Notre Dame. And I think for everybody in Nebraska, you look at it, I'll move ahead of you. For me, it was looking at Danny Kalin, who's out of Bellevue West, as the next quarterback, and then the 2 receivers that came with him. And what that really means, I think, is Nebraska is locking down its borders. And again, players that we would see leave, are now staying in Nebraska. Again, that goes back to the message or the program building that Matt Rule is doing. And I don't think they'd be doing that if they felt like they were going to have more success somewhere else. So, Carter Nelson I believe he was recruited by Alabama as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, a lot of big name schools. You mentioned Notre Dame, I think, was the biggest one in terms of the threat, possibly, in terms of taking him away. How important is that, building a wall, so to speak, around Nebraska? Because you look at last year, Malachi Coleman, right, staying in state as well. How big of it is, because, you look around the state of Nebraska, right? I'm talking to the bluntest guy in the world right now. It's not Florida. It's not California. We all know that. But it seems like I kind of look back the last 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. There's always a player or two that's kind of in that 4-star range that Omaha, Lincoln, maybe area that you got to try to keep home. Ainsworth up for Carter Nelson, as we just said. How important is it to lock in the state to kind of build that? Because Matt Rule has said, hey, I want to see kids at these camps when they're 8 years old and dreamed of playing for Nebraska. How important is locking up that border?
Well, like you said, it's not Florida. It's not. You don't have a lot of population, so when you get really good people, you have to retain them. And I think the other key to that is, there is a lot of listen. There's a lot of wide open space in Nebraska. There's 6-man football, 8-man, 11-man football. There's a lot of players out there that nobody's ever heard of and nobody's ever going to see. And sometimes some of those guys are completely unnoticed. And when you get a Carter Nelson and when you get a Danny Kalin and when you get the 2 other guys from Bellevue West, whose names escape me right now, when you get those guys, the other people who are like, I could walk on at Nebraska, or maybe I could go to North Dakota. I mean, those programs are really good at the next level, but you start pulling in some more players that you might find that are diamonds in the rough. And those guys do have a place, in the program. So I think, plus let's face it, if you're a coach, if you're a coach that's in his 5th year and you have a bad year, and you didn't take all the Nebraska players and you were just like, I don't need them. Who cares about them? You're more likely to get fired than if you just sucked up to the home base, for God's sakes. I mean, part of this is politics and diplomacy. Like Carter Nelson, you want to get that guy. He's good. Danny Kalin was an Elite 11 quarterback. I think he finished top in accuracy. We don't know what he's going to do. He might, I'm not going to say he's going to outplay Dylan Raiola, but you look at football. How many quarterbacks didn't finish the season in the Big Ten by itself? When you turn on the NFL right now, and I assume a lot of people watch the NFL. I like watching the NFL more than I ever have. But you would turn on the NFL games and you go, who's this guy? Why is he he's the quarterback now. Why is he the quarterback? I mean, it's carnage. So I think you need to have 2 or 3 quarterbacks that are serviceable. We saw that this last season with Nebraska where we really kind of didn't have one,
right. Yeah.
And we didn't go to a bowl game. And largely that's because we didn't have a quarterback and we had turnover machines. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way it was.
So a couple of things based on what you just said there is I always thought, and I've been thinking, I can't remember if I've communicated this to you before, but if I have before, stop me. And if I haven't, well, here you go. I always thought the Matt Rule and Scott Frost dynamic for recruiting the state was backwards. Right, you would think the guy born and raised in the state, won a national championship as a quarterback, you would think, that guy, hey, we got to keep these kids home, we got to do this. But, of course, He came from UCF and kind of wanted to go all over the place. Matt Rule's, the first day, or maybe 2 days, 3 days, he's posting on Twitter of I'm in this town of 800 people, I'm in this town, I'm in that town, and he gets it in terms of what you got to do. And it's maybe not because, hey, we're going to have all this talent, I'm winning over the people. I'm doing what I have to do to kind of set a good example in the state.
I mean, he understands that. I think you look at coaches and you realize that, in my opinion, the best coaches actually really aren't coaches anymore in a way. They're CEOs. They're people who run a program and they hire people that can coach for them and parts of their program for him. And I think Matt Rule did, when, like you said, when he first showed up, realized that he had to rebuild a lot of relationships. He had to go to Omaha and talk to a lot of high school coaches that felt ignored, and because they largely were ignored by Scott Frost. I mean, I think the guy just thought he was going to show up and say, "Hey, I'm Scott Frost," and everybody would fall over and send their kids to Nebraska. And, you have to work at it. You have to glad hand. You have to be diplomatic. And I mean, my God, that guy went to towns in Nebraska I don't think I've ever been to. I mean, there's a lot of tiny little towns in Nebraska, for God's sakes. I'm from one of them. And, he went around the state, and that's a lot of work, and he did a good job of it. And I think we're going to see it pay off. That's obviously our hope.
I want to talk about, this might make you pretty happy as well, and a lot of Husker fans happy as well. Let's talk about Grant Brix, because for the second consecutive year, the top player in the state of Iowa is not going to be a Hawkeye, and there's kind of a backside to that tape as well. For the second consecutive year, the top player was an offensive lineman, which those are players that Iowa, had. Like last year, it was Caden Proctor, who went to Alabama. Now it's this year, Grant Brix, right? Caden Proctor was closer to signing day. Brix has been committed for a while. This guy's a bulldozer, right? I look at him, and man, he's great. And we know Scott Frost, or I shouldn't say Scott Frost, sorry about that. Matt Rule and their offensive coaching staff has said that we've been. This conversation's getting a little too frosty right now. I got to get that out of my head.
Right, it is.
It's unseasonably warm in Minnesota, so I shouldn't be thinking of all these frosty type of analogies. But the point I'm trying to make here is that these are usually guys that Iowa locks up. And this time they're going to Nebraska. Yeah. Matt Rule said he wants to be better in the trenches, and this has just got to be another one of those things where he's kind of, putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, it was a good get. I mean, I think the other thing you saw was a weakness in Nebraska's offensive line. They have, I think, everybody coming back except for, I think pretty much everybody. I think there's some undecideds depending upon whether or not they're too beat up to return. But, obviously Nebraska's offensive line has been, it's been terrible the past few years. It got a lot better this year. We do need a tackle like Grant Brix. And I don't really understand what's going on at Iowa, but, if they want to give us their best players, I'm all for that. I mean, the guy, I don't think the guy's going to walk into Memorial Stadium and start the first game next year, but he's certainly got a frame that you can build on. And he's certainly, in the position where we are, we need tackles. I mean, we need some things, mostly on offense. I think the defense was played extremely well last season. We did pick up some defenders, but the offense is really where we need to pick up the guys and build them. I think what you see out of this class is Matt Rule's concept that Nebraska is going to be a development program, and we have to be. Again, It goes back to that lack of population thing.
And that's boy. And let's talk about Let's go back to quarterback for a minute. You talk about Daniel Kaelin coming into this. There was when the whole Dylan Raiola thing went down, he was thinking about visiting Michigan State, and then he canceled kind of at the last minute. Said, "I'm committed to Nebraska." Where do you think his future lies right now? Because I kind of was putting some scenarios together in my head. He could let's say Dylan starts his freshman year and he plays all three, right? And he goes to the NFL after his junior year. Daniel could technically redshirt. Dylan plays 3. Then Daniel could come back and play his redshirt junior, and I think redshirt senior year. We know the transfer portal exists. I know it's very wishful thinking from a Nebraska point of view, but I guess you can maybe lean into he's a hometown kid. Maybe he's going to be, he's maybe going to be willing to do that. Where do you think the future? What do you think the future holds for Daniel Kaelin?
Well, it goes back to that thing I brought up earlier about quarterbacks. They don't survive a season, for crying out loud, and you need more than one. What would I say about him? Number one, Nebraska has to find a quarterbacks coach. That's the thing. I don't think Marcus Satterfield can be the guy that's going to do all this stuff. So they need to find a quarterback coach. And I guess Danny Kaelin, I think people were disappointed with the year he had at Bellevue West, but I'll be honest with you, because I said I was blunt, didn't I? I mean, you're planning this out 2 or 3 years. My God, have you seen quarterbacks? It's like you can't plan 3 weeks out with them. And I don't know if you heard the other news tonight, but Chubba Purdy at Nebraska announced that he is transferring.
Yep.
So Danny Kaelin has we have a small quarterback room. There's rumors of one more quarterback coming, but I think, Danny Kaelin is one hit away from being the starter. And if he can develop along with Dylan Raiola, then, we'll see which one of them, where they stay, where they go. A lot of this stuff is probably dependent upon nil offers and things like that too. I'm excited. I like the idea that Danny Kaelin decided to stay with Nebraska because, I imagine that it's got to be hard to be another quarterback and go, all right, I'm going to go play at Nebraska. And then all of the news, everything that happens is Dylan Raiola. And, you barely get mentioned, but maybe that puts a chip on his shoulder and he comes out and he plays hellacious football. So I think I was as excited for the Bellevue West guys we're bringing in as I was for Dylan Raiola. Probably, I'm somewhat of a contrarian too. So there's that.
Yeah, Davion Hall and Isaiah McMorris. I think Hall's maybe a little bit more 4, and then McMorris maybe is a little bit lower. One kind of last thing, there's been a lot of, what's the deal? What do you think about Casey Thompson? Is there some smoke behind that? Or, we saw Gabe Irvin Jr. kind of post about him on social media. There's been a lot more steam behind that as well. Do you think that's something that could happen? It seems like Casey Thompson's been playing forever, but, eventually he's going to get to his last year of eligibility. Do you think that this is something could happen? Could Nebraska bring in a transfer to kind of help Dylan, or how's that, do you think, going to go?
It'd be nice to have a guy who's actually played football at the collegiate level to start and to be able to teach the other guys, or at least tell them stuff, to help them along. I think the other thing was Casey Thompson's, the talk about him was that he's looking to get into coaching, and, maybe that's something that he could be a grad assistant later at Nebraska too. So I would love to see Casey Thompson back. I liked him when he was our quarterback, under the last year of Scott Frost, but I think it would be fun to have him play. Here's the thing. His senior year it was just dysfunction under the other guys. And it would be nice if he comes back to play at Nebraska. I see where somebody said he's going to be a grad assistant. I've heard that. Yeah. It would be nice for him to come back and at least get some games in with a coaching staff that isn't a complete dysfunctional mess. To I don't know, it'd be kind of like a clearing the plumbing type situation. I don't know that, I would just like to see it, kind of a redemption tour kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. That would be, it's been a wild career over there because last year he goes over to FAU and I think he gets a season-ending injury of some sort, right? He kind of reunites with Tom Herman, who is his head coach, I believe, at the University of Texas. And that's the thing, I think, now in this transfer portal era is once you get to, and of course you got all these COVID years kind of stacking up now. Now that's becoming less of a thing the further we kind of go out into the distance a little bit. But, when you factor in COVID years, and once you're a grad transfer, you can just transfer year after year after year after year if you really wanted to. I mentioned this at the top of the show. What are your thoughts on kind of the December signing period? Because they talked about it on Big Ten Network. 1 year from today, they're going to be playing playoff games on signing day. I think this kind of needs to move back to February a little bit, but what's kind of your thoughts on that situation?
Well, all of this stuff is in flux, and it all has to do with just the massive crap ton of money that's coming into sports. I was washing the dishes tonight, and I thought about it just popped into my head. When was the last time you turned on TV to just watch TV? And I'm not talking about Netflix. I'm talking about a broadcast channel like ABC, CBS.
Yep.
When was the last time you actually watched a TV program?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So you were seeing just.
Well, we had John freeze up
and
there.
all of this stuff is in flux with the playoff expanding, all the nil money. Colleges have crap tons of. Tom Allen got a $20 million buyout, for God's sakes. There's something wrong with the world when that happens. Not that I have anything against Tom Allen, but you know what I mean? It's just like, we have this massive cash bag full of cash over here. Let's just give it to Tom. That's how much money's in this. So, the problem is there's still universities attached to these things, and the student athletes, quote unquote, have to come in and fit into that schedule before they fit into anything else. I think the early signing day, we all complained that, Bo Pelini screamed a lot. The signing day was too far out. Now it's too early. Now people are complaining about, the portal, they're transferring before the bowl games. Well, they're transferring before the bowl games because they have to go into semester schools and get into classes and stuff. And I am going to be on the record in 2 or 3 years. This is probably all going to be changing when, the NCAA loses lawsuits that are going to be costing them billions of dollars. And, there's probably going to be rulings come out where students are employees. All of this stuff is going to be in flux. So would I like to see it move? I don't know. If we move it, we're just going to complain about it being over there. So it's all chaos and insanity. And I think that fits college football pretty well because, let's face it, this is kind of the dumbest sport in the world, and we all love it. And
it's different. It's different.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to explain college football to people who don't watch college football. I've learned that very recently. Someone I was saying, about these bowl games coming up is just someone asking me about, why are some bowl games more important than others? And I'm like, sit down, buddy. It's gonna take a minute. Last thing before you go, volleyball. That was the first volleyball game I watched all year. Unfortunately, things get busy. What was kind of your thoughts on this Nebraska volleyball season? Because, man, I heard they got no seniors. I know a couple of guys transferred, I think, it looked like.
Right.
But man, this is a dynamite program that really, and volleyball is becoming such a popular sport.
Well, it's unfortunate that was the game you watched because Nebraska got their ass kicked by Texas. Texas, I don't like saying good things about Texas. Who does? It's like saying good things about Iowa. What's the point? But, you got to hand it to Texas. They beat 3 number 1 seeds. Yeah. They beat Stanford, Wisconsin, and us. And they won a national title. They got hot. They kicked the crap out of Wisconsin. Then they beat the hell out of us. And that was shocking for Nebraskans. And I think it was – the thing is the youth showed up in that game, and it hadn't all season long. And from what I understand, this was the most watched volleyball game ever on TV because it was on ABC instead of one of the cable networks. And it is a fast-growing sport, and it's fun. And, in Nebraska, we love it because Terry Pettit back in the 70s, I'm old, right? I'm an old crusty guy. I was there, at Nebraska in the early 80s, well, for most of the 80s, because I went to school for 7 years. I was one of those guys. But, they built that program from them. They built volleyball. And because of a lot of the work of Terry Pettit at Nebraska, volleyball now is all over the place, and it's growing very quickly. And it's fun. And you could say things like the women are just Amazons, and they are. But it's a fun sport. It's fast. I wouldn't want to get hit by one of those balls.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, God, no.
I've shot some volleyball, and I've been close to the court, and you really just, you don't want to get hit by them. I don't want to, anyway.
All right, John, we appreciate you coming on. You can find John Coronation on YouTube, coronation.com, as well as at Coronation. John, what else you got to say before we go off here?
You know what? Can I plug another channel I started?
Go for it.
Okay. I have recently, here's the thing. I've started a channel called Hardcore College Football History. I only have a few videos out, but what they are, the first series is from 1869 to 1912, and those were the decades in which college football went from mob football to rugby to modern football. I realize it's weird saying modern football for something over 100 years old, but nobody has ever really covered football history very well, or to an extent, and that's my goal with it. I haven't done a lot yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to tell a story with video editing, but I would appreciate the support, and if you like what you see, let me know, give me some feedback, that kind of stuff.
I'm a huge history nerd and college football history, so that's that's going to be great. Looking forward to checking that out. All right, John, thanks for joining.
Ted, and all you guys listening, Merry Christmas to y'all. May all your teams win, even if there's any Iowa people on.
We got Wisconsin next, so.
Yeah, goodwill toward men. You guys take care of yourselves. Thanks, Ted. Take care, man.
All right, thank you, John. All right, that's John Johnston from Corn Nation joining us here tonight, talking all things Nebraska. Of course, they're all about what just happened there with Dylan Raiola leading their program here in the future. It's not very often on this channel that I get to express my fanhood. I don't get to maybe nerd out about Badger football as much as I would like to sometimes. But now, for the next, 15 minutes or so, I get the opportunity to do that, as we are now joined by Ron Herrings from Locked On Badgers here joining us tonight on our early signing day special. Ryan, first class in the books for Luke Fickell. I'm going to try to be a little bit, kind of check my Badger bias a little bit. Top 25. I think this one is pretty darn good to kind of start off with.
Yeah, I don't even know why you need to check your bias, really.
I don't have to.
No, this is the time to be excited. This is the time to let it out a little bit. Listen, it's a really good first class, right? It's Luke Fickell's obviously coming in first class, top 25. The depth of it is very impressive. I know we're going to talk about a couple of specific pieces. There are some classes, I know you just had Nebraska on, that are buoyed. And this isn't good or bad, but they're buoyed a little bit by a five-star guy at the top. Maybe the depth isn't quite as Wisconsin, I think, 10, 11 4-stars on rivals. Now the composite's a little different, but it's a really deep, good class that addresses a lot of needs. So, yeah, I would say let the biases out. Be excited. Let's go.
Yeah, I agree with you with the depth, right? You mentioned Nebraska kind of at the top. They got Dylan Raiola, Carter Nelson, Grant Bricks. But when you look at Wisconsin, I think rivals, had them at 11 4-stars, if I'm not mistaken. But let's kind of dive into this one a little bit. Some of the individual players. The first thing I think of, RBU is alive and well, right? All this talk, Phil Longo, he's going to 4 wide receivers. He's going to spread it out. He's going to throw it around, right? A lot of us thought that kind of coming into last season as well, but there were even some games last season, right? Having Braylon Allen, right? Kind of the stereotypical Wisconsin running back kind of helped things out. But you got 2 4-star backs, Dylan Jones and Darian Dupree. RBU is here. It's still here despite everything that's going on. Kind of break down both Jones and Dupree and what you see in both those guys.
Yeah, 2 really good players and 2 complementary pieces. Dylan Jones is maybe the crown jewel of the recruiting class, 4-star across the board on every major recruiting site, blue chip offer list. I always look at players. Does the offer list match up to the film, to the production, and on every box he checks it, right? About 6 foot, 190 pounds, runs between the tackles in a system that he's going to run in Madison, breaks tackles, instinctive. A lot of high school players, they like to bounce it around on the outside because they're just so athletic. He runs like a running back, but he's still that athletic. Big time get for Wisconsin. Darian Dupree is more of that guy that you get in space. You run arrow routes with, smoke screens. Probably going to be more of a third down guy. Catches the ball really well. Incredible contact balance. Does not go down. Runs through tackles, spins around. Just really difficult in space. So you kind of have that in between the tackles hammer that Dylan can be, and then that out in space pass catching threat that modern offenses need with Darian. Both players had Alabama offers. Both players had blue chip offer list. Wisconsin specifically had to fend off Alabama for Darian Dupree down the stretch. They're really talented players. The other guy too, not to sleep on it. So there's that 3 running back class. Now the 2 that you mentioned get all the hype. Getting a Tuca is really good. Talking to someone inside the Wisconsin recruiting department, they mentioned a bowling ball with feet. Somebody who had an incredibly productive senior season, really, really powerful runner. So again, you're talking complementary football. They all bring something different to that running back stable. It's a great group.
I'm going to get to let's first finish with running backs, and then we'll kind of go into offensive line because not necessarily recruiting, even though it will affect maybe some of the guys coming in. You got Ches Malusi coming back for one more season. That was kind of a big deal because you had Jackson Aker and Cade Yakimelli in that running back room. How do you kind of see this? I know we're very far away from 2024, but how do you kind of see this running back room kind of shaken down now that you have Ches in there? How are these freshmen going to come in, and where do they kind of stack up with the Akers and the Yakimellis of the world?
Yeah, Ches coming back is huge, right? Because he's certainly going to be coming in as the number one guy. But these guys are going to play. Almost certainly Dupree or Jones is going to play right away, and potentially both of them. They're physically ready. That's part of the thing with running backs, too. If you go get a physically ready running back at the high school level that's played at a high level of competition, which both these running backs have, they're going to come in and physically be able to compete. So that doesn't mean 20 carries, but I could absolutely see Dylan becoming that number 2, and then Darian Dupree becoming kind of that weapon that they throw to occasionally. The other guys that you mentioned, Aker, Yakimelli, I don't know if they have the juice necessarily that these two guys have, but they're solid players too. So it'll be a competition, but I expect absolutely one of these true freshmen to play a meaningful role next year.
All right, let's talk about the offensive line, because I moved out of the state of Wisconsin in 2014, covered some high school football there, and you had, I think, not getting Garrick Sexton from a Wisconsin high school football powerhouse in Heartland Arrowhead. I figured that would be your reaction right off the bat. But right, he goes to Penn State. But then you steal one from Pennsylvania in Kevin Haywood, a 4-star on the offensive line. Does it kind of make up for not having Garrett Sexton, or do you kind of, we could have had both of them? What's kind of your thoughts on kind of that Penn State, Wisconsin 4-star offensive line trade, so to speak?
Yeah, so people who watch me on Locked On Badgers know I have a great affinity for Garrett Sexton. He would have been a Badger. I've talked to the family's a fan. They grew up fans. They just waited too long. They did offer him. It's not like they didn't go after him. So yeah, on that one, you could have had both. I would have liked to have both. I think Sexton has a big upside for Penn State. But Haywood's a really good get, right? That doesn't take away from the fact that Haywood's a really good get. Haywood is a little more physically ready. Sexton is more of he has to put on more weight. He's more of a projection guy. Haywood's going to come in a little heavier. You don't have to project as much, which is nice. Really good tackle prospect, moves well in space, finishes blocks. And he's kind of the cornerstone of this offensive line class, but they're bringing in 5 guys. It's a really talented physical group. I like the group a lot. I do get a little sad with Sexton. That's a good win for Penn State.
Yeah, that's man. If across when Luke Fickell and other college coaches, they establish relationships with high school coaches. That is, like I said, it's been almost a decade since I've been in that state. But that's one program within Wisconsin that you want to try to establish a relationship with, is Heartland Arrowhead. Let's kind of move on. Emerson Mandel. This is kind of from my neck of the woods here in the Twin Cities at Irondale High School. This guy's a bulldozer, right? I kind of saw that a little bit on his film when I kind of looked at him. What do you kind of think of Emerson Mandel kind of adding to this offensive line class?
Yeah, he's one of the most enjoyable of the film to watch. Right. Listen, one of the reasons we like sports is we like seeing people do things that we can't do. Right. Just physically imposing incredible things like that. We physically can't do. That's why we like sports. They're like gladiators. And Emerson Mandel, you said it, is a bulldozer. He is a rhino with a football helmet. It is fun to watch him play football. He's about 320 pounds, really physical, great leverage. He flies out. There was times where I was like, man, I kind of wish we were recruiting this guy as a defensive lineman with that get off and that size and that power. But he's really powerful. Now, there's not many reps of him pass blocking, right, at all. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time. They're going to have to refine some of that. But from a physical projection, he looks like a guard should look. And the other thing quickly with offensive line recruiting, for years, Wisconsin has been recruiting 6'6", 6'7" offensive linemen and just saying, we're going to stick you at guard. I like that they've got some 6'4" guys coming in. Mandel's a guard, and he's going to be a guard. He's never going to be a tackle. And he could be a really good guard in 2 years.
All right, this is the one that I really want. I enjoy talking about the running backs, but Maber Matoyer, right? That's what I really wanted to talk about. Quarterback out of the state of Texas. You recently had him on Locked On Badgers. First thing, what did you learn when you looked at the tape and looked at his talent? And number 2, what did you kind of learn about him maybe as a person when you kind of talked to him on your show recently?
Yeah, well, let's start with 1. So when he committed, the senior year hadn't happened yet, so he committed before his senior year, and you watch the junior tape, right? Because that's what you watch when a guy commits. You watch what you have, and you saw every tool. I use baseball analogies a lot. He's the high school pitcher that scouts would see throws 97 and he's 6'6", and they're like so projectable. But there's some mechanical stuff, right? The ball kind of flies, it sprays around a little bit. But every tool in the toolbox, 6'6", can run, physical. And then you watch the senior film, and he's cut down dramatically on the mistakes. The accuracy's better while retaining all those physical skills. Playing at the highest level of Texas high school football, 6A, he threw 1 pick this year. That was a bit of an issue last year. He cleaned that up. And to me, that's almost more impressive than any of the tools, because the most talented players don't always need to get better at the high school level, right? Because they can still out-athlete people. To see that growth at the high school level from the junior to senior year is incredibly impressive. And then when you talk to them, the competitiveness. So that's the one thing that you can't measure on film all the time, right? You can't always get a feel. And it's not like I know the kid really, really well, but you talk to him and he was like, that 1 pick still eats me up. And it was because, this coverage, that he squatted on this, I should have looked him off. And you can just tell. You want a quarterback that gets a little ticked off throwing a pick. So I enjoyed the conversation. I think he has the intangibles. There is massive upside with him, but like a lot of quarterbacks now, he has to develop it.
So let's talk about that development. Let's talk about the future of the quarterback, because that's what all signing day is about, the future. It's about looking ahead possibly at a lot of these kids. So you got Tyler Van Dyke coming in, transfer quarterback. Braden Locke is in that room as well. Ups and downs a little bit this season after the Tanner Mordecai injury. Where do you kind of see this quarterback room possibly playing out in the future, kind of after this 1 year of Tyler Van Dyke? Does Braden Locke still find a place with it? I know you got LaCrue in that room as well. How does it all shake out, and kind of where does Mabry Matoy, or what is kind of his timeline possibly at Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I certainly don't have the crystal ball to know for sure. But obviously, you bring Van Dyke in to start this year, so there's your bridge. And then there were Badger fans that weren't thrilled with this idea of bringing in a veteran guy, because at some point you need to develop your younger players. You don't want to get a gunslinger every single year. But quite frankly, I like a lot of what Locke is, but he didn't show enough last year to not bring in a veteran. You had to get somebody in that room this year to kind of provide some leadership. So assuming he does what he does next year, what are you looking at? You're looking at a competition, because you still have Nick Evers in that room, the 4-star that they got from Oklahoma as well. Now, he's a bit in the doghouse. Like, he didn't pick up the playbook really quickly, but again, you're talking physical skills, maybe another year. And then it's honestly, it's just a gloves off competition. And that's what you want. You want to stack talent in the quarterback room with as many talented guys as you can and say, listen, the talent will rise to the top, and the guys who won't, I hate to say this, sounds callous, but the guys who won't will transfer. And they've stacked 3-4-star quarterbacks now. Now, if you're asking me, I think it's going to be Matt Toyer. I think he will be the guy. But the interesting thing here to keep in the back of your head is they also have a commitment from the younger Locke. So they have a commitment from Landon Locke out in Texas. And there is a risk you run if Mabry jumps Braden Locke. Do you potentially sour the relationship with the younger brother, who is very, very good and projectable? Was recently ranked as the top quarterback in Texas by one ranking. So it's an interesting dynamic there to just keep your eyes on.
Interesting. Yeah, that is a dynamic that I was kind of unaware about. So that certainly could have a ripple effect overall. I kind of asked this to John before. I'll ask it to you as well. Next year, 1 year from now, we're going to be playing a college football playoff first round game on this very date. You think the National Signing Day needs to move back to February, or kind of how? Because a lot of people are kind of saying that today, that they would rather see it move back a little bit. Where's kind of your opinion and thoughts of the calendar, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. And like a lot of tough questions, there's not a perfect answer for this. I know, I've had the honor, the privilege to interview a lot of high school kids the last couple of years, have them on the show, prospects. I can tell you this, that the process grinds on them. It really does. And I don't think a lot of them would want it 2 more months because recruiting doesn't end when you commit to a school, right? Like, I talk to players and they say, I still have 5 or 6 coaches calling me or calling my head coach, and it feels like I'm still being evaluated. So I don't know, man. Like, I feel what's best for the kids. And to me, if they know the decision, they know where they want to go, allowing them to shut it down a little early makes sense.
What do you think this Wisconsin team is going to look like? I'll kind of leave on this, because everybody thinks Longo's gonna spread it out, and it's just like the days of Barry Alvarez and Paul Christ, and we won't mention Gary Anderson football is out the window. What do you think this is going to look like going forward? Because like we said, still recruiting offensive line well, still recruiting the running game well. And I think people that said that right away don't think, well, I can't remember what year it was, but they had 2 1,000-yard rushers at North Carolina one of those years, right, that he was in. I think Sam Howell was the quarterback. What do you think Wisconsin looks like? Because I don't think this is as wide open as people think it's going to be going forward.
No, I 100% agree with you. Longo's not – he's not Mike Leach. Right. He's not going to have a quarterback throw 70 times a game in his offense. He wants running backs. And here's the other thing. Sometimes you can listen to what people say, or you can look at the actions, right? Look at the recruiting class and tell me, like you mentioned it. You bring in 3 running backs. You bring in mauling guards. One of the tight ends you're bringing in, Grant Steck, is a mauling 2-way tight end. They're recruiting to a system that's going to allow them to run and pass. And that's what they want. They want the balance. Again, if you go back to old Wisconsin, the balance was never there because it was too run heavy, it was too predictable. And I say old Wisconsin, like the last couple years of the Paul Chryst era, not sorry. Like Paul Chryst certainly had some explosive offenses as well, but it had gotten stale. And I think the opposite would be true if you went too pass heavy. You lose the balance. What he wants is balance and the ability for a defense not to be able to load up one way or the other.
All right, Ryan, thanks for being with us tonight. Locked on Badgers. You see the Twitter handle there at Ryan and Bucky. The schedule next season, you get Bama on the schedule. We all know things are getting tougher with the West Coast schools coming in. So it's going to be very fun to follow this team kind of going forward. I'm very curious to see, because year 2 right now, year 2 is the new year 3, right? In terms of building a program, Fickle is in year 2. It should be fun to see. Ryan, thanks for joining us here tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, that is Ryan Herrings with Locked On Badgers, covering all things Wisconsin Badgers over there as part of the Locked On Network as well. All right, folks, we continue on with our signing day coverage here. And earlier today, sometimes you got to match things up with folks' schedules, and I was able to do that earlier today with Richie Schneiderite from Rivals.com, covering all things Penn State, covering all things Rutgers as well. Penn State was able to put together another top 15 type of recruiting class. So here's our conversation from earlier in today, talking about the teams from the Northeast. We now head to the Northeast. Penn State and Rutgers as our coverage of early signing day continues. And with that, we are pleased to be welcomed now by Richie Schneiderite over at Rivals, covering all things Rutgers, covering all things Penn State here. And Richie, obviously a big day, a new era, of course, for the Big Ten. And let's start first on the Penn State side of things with you. This class kind of towards the top reminds me a little bit of maybe what was going on a couple of years ago with the Allers, with the Singletons, with the with those types of guys. Caden Saunders, right, is trying to work his way up the depth chart in Happy Valley as well. You got Ethan Grunkmeyer at the top. You've got Quentin Martin kind of sitting there at the top. Luke Reynolds, the top tight end of the country. Let's start first with Ethan Grunkmeyer at quarterback, an Elite 11 type of guy as well. Maybe a little bit under the radar, maybe compared to some of the other quarterbacks. We've been talking a lot about Dylan Raiola, of course, on this channel. What does Ethan Grunkmeyer really bring to the table at the quarterback position, you think, for Penn State?
Yeah, so he's kind of similar in the same style as Drew Allard. And I'm not just saying that because they have the same trainer and they've been training together for, I don't even know, 3-4 years now at this point. But no, he's really accurate. He's got a good build. Now, he doesn't have this, I shouldn't say he's the same exact build as Drew Allard, because Drew is just an anomaly almost. He's Josh Allen-esque, maybe even bigger a little bit. But yeah, no, Ethan Grunkmeyer can throw on the run. He's really accurate. I think accuracy is his biggest strength. You just see him out, and I've saw him a couple times at camps. I've seen him a couple times in games this year, and he just has such a nice touch on the ball, such an easy throw. It makes it look like it's almost effortless. And he's just another really good find by Penn State, because when they first offered him, he was kind of like a low ranked 3-star guy. And I know Mike Yursich obviously didn't work out as an offensive coordinator, but the guy could find quarterbacks and could find under the radar gems too, because this was a really good one. And then he found Jackson Smolik last year too. And he ended up being an Elite 11 quarterback. So that's now 1, 2, 3 Elite 11 quarterbacks in a row for Penn State.
So when we talk about the quarterback position, there's a lot of other teams in the Big Ten. Wisconsin is going from transfer to transfer. There's a lot of that. But now, Penn State, you're going from high school recruit to high school recruit. This is, in today's day and age of college football, this is pretty rare. Is James Franklin kind of putting an emphasis on making sure they get these top-level quarterbacks?
Yeah, 100%. I know, I want to say the percentages, there's something like, I think it's 75, 80% of starting Power 5 quarterbacks are transfers. And don't get me wrong, it works because look at the past couple Heisman winners. I mean, they're all transfers. But James is kind of emphasizing like, hey, if we could do this the high school route and develop these guys, like he uses Sean Clifford as a really good example of a 5-year guy. He was I know people at Penn State were kind of a little disappointed with how he played because they would say he was average. But if you look back, he had some really good numbers and some really good seasons. And they're hoping Drew Allard can kind of capitalize on that and take them to that next level and then just keep going from there and just keep developing high school kids over and over again.
It could really, it's the old school, right? It's kind of crazy to think that it's the old school way, but that's kind of how it is right now. Those numbers you really threw out with transfer quarterbacks. Let's go on to some of these other skill positions in this class. Quentin Martin, right? In-state kid out of the state of Pennsylvania. I had time to really quickly take a look at his film. Returning kicks. They split him outside. They put him in the backfield. Sweeps, screens, everything. Now, when I kind of look at that and I kind of look at the landscape of what Penn State might look like, I say that might be able to, all those skill sets you kind of put together, he might be able to utilize that to get on the field pretty early. Do you kind of share that same sentiment?
Yeah, 100%. I know everyone talks about Katron Allen and Nick Singleton because they're one of the best duos in the country in terms of running back groups, but they're both coming back. They already both said they're coming back. Trey Potts, the third back, is expected to come back next year too, and he even had carved himself out a little role at times too. But Quentin Martin with his kick returning abilities and punt returning abilities, I think he'll definitely see the field there. And then on top of that, his pass catching ability is phenomenal. And I've said it time and time again during his recruitment. He's 6'2", 205. You can and he's got good speed. You can kind of line him up in the slot at times if you really need to. He's just capable of doing just about anything on offense, and he's just a complete freak athlete. And that's why he's actually the top ranked Penn State commit for our rankings, at least.
Yeah, you mentioned all of that, and considering what they do have in the backfield with Allen and Singleton, and maybe what they maybe have or don't have. Transfers are still on the table here for Penn State at wide receiver. That could certainly be interesting. Let's move on to tight end. You're looking what most people think is the top tight end of the country in Luke Reynolds out of Connecticut, right? You're kind of recruiting this area, and we'll get to Rutgers and kind of the similar area as well, but James Franklin really focusing in type of a more local recruiting type of mindset. But he's playing quarterback out there in high school in Connecticut, athletic route runner. Once again, we take a look at a guy that can be versatile, kind of line up in different spots. Where does he stack up, you think? Now you have the loss of Theo Johnson at tight end. Do you think he could maybe find himself in the discussion here in 2024 in terms of playing a tight end?
Yeah, I think he'll definitely be in the discussion. He's an interesting one because again, a kid that Penn State kind of found, recruited, and got committed pretty quickly, and then all of a sudden, huge rise in the rankings because he was switching from quarterback to tight end. Last season, not this past season, but the 2022 season, he was playing quarterback for his high school team, and everyone's like, he's whatever, he's okay quarterback. They switch him to tight end, and they give him a 4-star quarterback in Dante Reno, who's committed and now signed to South Carolina. And it's like, oh my God, this kid's actually super athletic. Former basketball player. He's able to up and high point the ball really well. Not afraid of contact either. He's actually a pretty solid blocker for a guy his size. But their tight end room, like you said, they're losing Theo Johnson to the NFL. Tyler Warren could potentially go to the NFL. I would say he probably stays in the next year, but that's not guaranteed. No one really knows yet. But they also have a couple young guys in the previous class, and Andrew Rapplier and Joey Schlaffer, who are also pretty good tight ends in their own right. So it's going to be interesting to see how those guys all compete. I think Luke has the highest upside of those guys, but I think you could actually argue that one of those other two guys might be a little bit ahead of him, and that's fair to say because they've obviously been there for a year now.
Wrapping up on Penn State's class, this is somewhere, depending on what service you kind of look at, 15, 14, 13, 12, somewhere in on there. Yeah. To wrap up the Nittany Lions, what's your overall thoughts on this class in 2024?
I think you mentioned in the beginning, it's definitely top heavy. There's a lot of defensive linemen. There's a lot of high ceiling guys, and they're taking a risk on a couple of these guys. Like a T.A. Cunningham's an interesting one because when his recruitment first started, he shot all the way up to top 10, and he was number 8 for us at one point. Now he's completely out of the top 250. There's other guys that are kind of under the radar dudes, and like Antoine Belgrave Shorter down in Florida, who I think is actually a lot better than his ranking shows. Garrett Sexton out in Wisconsin, Egan Boyer, offensive lineman. There's a lot of high ceiling guys, and there's a lot of potential out of these guys. It's going to be up to Penn State to develop them. And if they could develop them, I don't care what this number says. This could be a top 10 class when it's all said and done.
Garrett Sexton was an interesting one because Wisconsin was hoping that they could possibly keep him home as well. But I think a Pennsylvania lineman went over to Wisconsin as well, so they were kind of swapping back and forth
Kevin
a little
Haywood.
bit. Yeah, so let's talk now. Let's switch gears and let's talk about the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Boy, one thing that's really impressed me to kind of start off on this and then go into recruiting, because they're somewhat correlated, is the amount of players that are staying in Piscataway, especially on the defensive side of the ball. You know, we all know it, right? Those who cover this conference, the sport, on Twitter, you see a lot of the words, you see the image that's posted, and all of a sudden the first thing you think of, oh, he's transferring. It's a with that being said season, as they say. But all of those guys are staying at Rutgers. The Tyrene Powells, the Aaron Lewises, all of these guys are coming back. It seems to me like Greg Schiano is recruiting, and he said this, I think, in the offseason interview with Adam Brenneman. He's recruiting his type of guys that really fit. They might not have the most stars behind their name, but once he gets them in the system for a couple of years, he really builds on them. Is that kind of what you see as well, and does this class in 2024 kind of reflect that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you go back and look, like a Robert Longerbeam, he's now an all-conference cornerback. If you look at him as a recruit, he was a 2-star flip from Temple, and everyone's like, what are they doing taking this 5'10", 150, 160-pound kid? And I was in that group too. I was like, that's a tiny kid. Like, what are we doing here? Like, Greg raves about these tall, lengthy DBs that he loves, and they're taking kids like that. And then look, 2-3 years later, now Longerbeam's playing himself into the NFL conversation. But yeah, recruiting wise, it's basically, he always says that he's going to start with New Jersey, and it's always been that way. And maybe it hasn't always worked out, but in his first tenure, he had New Jersey kind of locked down pretty well. And now you're starting to see him get back to that a little bit more and more. His first 2-3 cycles, I don't really count that first one because it was a weird year where he had I think it was 8 to 10 days just to sign a recruiting class. Yeah. But over the next couple of cycles, you see more and more New Jersey, New York, PA kids starting to stay home more every single year, and this class reflects it more than anything.
Great segue into my next point. You have some of the players that are towards the top of this class coming from a New York and New Jersey area. A couple of teammates in here as well. Let's kind of go on and talk about some of these top players as well. Let's kind of first talk about the player who's not in the Northeast, Antonio White, 4-star wide receiver out of Georgia, kind of headlines this class. What do you know, and what can you kind of tell me about what he brings to the table? Because this is a team in Rutgers that needs a little bit more oomph, I think, on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, so actually he's coming in as a defensive back. He's going to come in as a safety. His tape, he's played wide receiver, he's played safety, he's played, I think he's even ran the ball a couple times this season. He's played kick return, and he's just a super freak athlete. He's really intriguing because he has really good coverage skills. The minute that ball's in the air, he's like a ball hawk type guy. He will flock to it no matter where it is. And he's a hard hitter on defense too, and kind of like that hard-hitting box type safety that I could see at the next level.
Let's talk about some of these teammates as well. Now let's get into that New Jersey, New York kind of things. From Notre Dame High School here in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, Gabriel Winovich, and then A.J. Suris. I hope I got that name right, the quarterback right there. Talk to me about those two kids, because I mean, right there, 4-star, high 3-star, depending on which service, where you look at it. These are two players locally from the New Jersey area that it looks like have some pretty good stars, at least behind them, that could maybe be big players in Rutgers down the road.
Yeah, AJ Suris, the quarterback in the first place, he's just a phenomenal kid. He's another guy that's really accurate, really good, very good on the run, has really good size, and he can read a defense like perfectly. And part of that is for the sole fact that he grew up basically watching Princeton football nonstop because his dad's the head coach of Princeton. His dad used to tell him, or was telling me, which I should say even a couple months ago, he's like, man, he was on the sidelines as like an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, just watching and learning and trying to pick my brain, pick the offensive coordinator's brain. And he's like, I've never seen a 10-year-old do this, but like, I guess because I was a football coach, this is from his perspective. I was a football coach, like he would just start learning more and more. And he really knows how to pick apart a defense. very smart kid, and that's really what you want from the quarterback position, an accurate and smart passer. You don't always need the big arm. It definitely helps, don't get me wrong, but he still has a solid arm too. But and then his teammate Gabriel Winovich, he's going to come in as a running back. I think we have him listed as an athlete. He's technically from Michigan, but he transferred to Notre Dame for his senior year to play with his quarterback and get a little bit more comfortable with him. And it was kind of interesting because I believe they were living together as well for his senior season. And it's just you don't really see something like that every too often, especially going from Michigan to New Jersey.
Where do you look at, you mentioned AJ and his talent coming in. I mean, for Rutgers, right? A couple of years ago, they bring in Gavin Wimsett, who's played the last couple of years, hasn't been overly impressive. Do you see things in AJ where maybe that could be the guy to maybe succeed where maybe Gavin has fallen a little bit short? Or do you see similarities, differences? Where do you see that between maybe Gavin Wimsett and AJ?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, I hate throwing freshman quarterback out there. I just don't think it works unless you have, like, I don't know, a Dylan Raiola maybe. That's a different scenario. Yeah, it's a completely different scenario. But if you're Rutgers, where your offensive line isn't the greatest in the world, don't get me wrong, they played a lot better this year. But I'd have refused to throw a freshman quarterback out there. They've done it with Art Sikowski, and he got crushed in, what was it, game 2 or 3 versus Ohio State, and I think that's what ruined his confidence completely. Another note, they just hired. They just hosted Ethan Kaliakmanis. I don't know how to pronounce that one. Yep. There we go, Kaliakmanis. They just hosted him, and I'd be a little shocked if he doesn't end up a Scarlet Knight for the sole fact that Kirk Shiraka, the new OC at Rutgers, old OC at Rutgers too, was the OC at Minnesota during his time there. And recruited him there too. So I'd be a little shocked if he doesn't end up coming to Rutgers. And it's going to be a quarterback competition between the three of them in January. But I do think AJ would probably be the third string. And ideally, you want to put him in a red shirt. But I think AJ's got multi-year potential as a starter.
We'll kind of end on that note here is where do you see this court? Because with Ethan Kaliakmanis possibly coming in, you mentioned the connection he had with Kirk Shiraka, of course, at Minnesota. Do we see a potential scenario where Ethan possibly comes in, they battle for the job, things look good in the spring, and then maybe Gavin hits the road to the portal in the spring? Or how do you kind of see this quarterback battle possibly shaking out as the months go on?
Yeah, I think you kind of just described it perfectly. They both have the same exact amount of eligibility. They both have used their redshirt year, so they both have 2 years remaining each. I think it's probably winner take all. And in today's age of the portal, I think you want to play. And if you want to play, you're going to transfer, whether that be going down a level or maybe try to find something. Maybe a Power 5 picks you up and takes a risk on you. Maybe a G5 picks you up, and then look at some of these guys now. They go to G5, and then they're graduate transfer, and they bounce back up to Power 5. So Cole Schneider might be a perfect example of that. Former Rutgers guy who went to Buffalo, lit it up a little bit. Now he's starting to get Power 5 offers. You got Vanderbilt, Syracuse. I forget the other two, but so I mean, I think it's probably win or go home.
Richie Schneiderite, thanks for joining us here. Tell all the folks where they can find your work because there's a lot there.
Yeah, no, there is definitely a lot. You could find me on Twitter at RivalsRichie. I'm very sarcastic on there, so just be careful if you follow me on there. But I'm also at Rutgers.rivals.com, PennState.rivals.com, every social media platform possible at Rutgers Rivals, at Penn State Rivals. I also cover UConn Rivals as a little fun side gig, and it's fun. The whole Northeast is it's kind of like my little franchise, I guess, if you want to call it.
That is Richie Schneiderite, Rivals Richie, our conversation from earlier today, talking all things Rutgers and Penn State and their recruiting kind of coming down the line. All right, it's time to go from Rutgers all the way out into the Pacific Northwest because that's what the Big Ten is here nowadays. All right, I am now pleased to be welcomed by my buddy over at the QB11 show, Mr. Doug Scott, joins us now talking all things Oregon signing day, talking all things Oregon recruiting. Doug, it's a good day. It's a good day in your neck of the woods, isn't it?
Very good day. Yeah, it's an excellent day out here. It was certainly a good day coming in, but it got better. Oregon, I think, finished with the number 5 recruit. Well, it's not done, but have the number 5 recruiting class in the country, second in the conference. We're just behind Ohio State. So, Yeah, really good day.
Really good day. It's the second-ranked class in the Big Ten, as Doug just said here. And the big news of the day. This was already 6th, 7th in the country, depending on what service you look at. But then the flips. It was 4-star wide receiver Jeremiah McClellan from Ohio State, and then you get one from your West Coast foe, former Pac-12 and now Big Ten foe, Ryan Pelham. How big were those flips in terms of today? Because you look at Troy Franklin is going to be going. There's a good amount of players that could be coming back at wide receiver for Oregon, but in looking at the future, this is looking pretty good for the Ducks at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, those two were huge. I mean, first of all, Oregon also held on to every commit in the class. They signed them all. There was a few that were, had been being worked on by some other schools in the last week or two. And so there was some dangers of losing some flips. They held all those. But then coming into today, the wide receiver position was really, if you looked at this class, position group by position group, it was the one group in the class that really wasn't strong for Oregon. They had some decommitments, planned or otherwise over the last few months. And we're really down to just 2 receivers in the class. Really, really like Dylan Gresham out of California. I think he's a really dynamic playmaker. But beyond him, they really needed some more in this class, especially that room is a little thin. And so to be able to go out and Oregon's been recruiting both McClellan and Pelham all through the cycle, right? They were finalists for Pelham and McClellan, I think, with those 2 schools back when they originally committed. They never stopped committing them, particularly McClellan out of Ohio State. They've been working on him all fall. They had him out to a game a few months back, even though he was an Ohio State commit. So that one was huge. We'd kind of heard some smoke that might be happening over the last 24, 48 hours, but to get that flip and to have him send in those papers and sign was huge. And then obviously taking Pelham away from USC. Your viewers or listeners may not know, but Ryan Pelham's uncle was a coach for Oregon for like 20 years. Don Pelham coached linebackers, was the defensive coordinator of our 2014 semifinalists or finalist team, finished second to Ohio State that year. And so there's some family connections there. And so adding those 2 receivers to the class that also included Dylan Gresham then really makes it a complete class. And 20 blue chips in the class, which is second only to Georgia, tied with Alabama for the number of blue chips overall in the class. And just incredible top-end talent, but also hit every possession group across the board and tons of depth. So it's Oregon's best class ever, to be honest.
Let's talk about the reason why it is their best class ever is because of that guy that's heading everything, and that is head coach Dan Lanning. He kind of got his start as a coach, as a graduate assistant, specializing in recruiting and really being that guy because sometimes the guys don't want to go out on the trail and really do that when they're kind of younger in your career. Dan Lanning was a guy that really rose through the ranks, maybe because of his prowess as a recruiter. And boy, I was thinking coming into this thing that throughout recruiting, throughout everything, Dan Lanning could be a top, 3, 4, 5, whatever, coach in the Big Ten when we start things in 2024. Now his recruiting prowess has got to be towards the top, if not the very top. And boy, this is very impressive what Lanning has been able to do. Is this expected maybe from Duck fans that, we're expecting top 5? Or is even this type of success a little bit surprising in the short term that Lanning's been there?
I would say, the expectations for recruiting at Oregon have certainly changed over the last 6-7 years, right? I mean, prior to Mario Cristobal coming in and Willie Taggart briefly in the 1 year he was here, right? I think the expectation was if you can get, finish top 15, Chip Kelly did that pretty routinely, right? If you got things rolling, maybe into the late teens in a down year. But really the idea that you could be in the top 10 and be there consistently really wasn't something that I think Oregon fans could expect realistically to happen. I think Mario Cristobal was able to get in there a couple of times. Those classes didn't actually pan out to be as successful on the field as they were on paper. But certainly with Dan has just ramped up that game a little bit more. And so I think with, the transfer portal era, NIL, the things that Oregon has going with their collectives, I think obviously now that you've seen it a few times, I think it is the expectation. The expectation is you should be in the top 10 every year. And I think top 5 is, I wouldn't say expecting top 5, but like that's an area where Oregon can get to. And obviously we're seeing this year, they can get to 5. I don't think you always have the challenges. You're going to get to one. Can you beat Georgia and Bama? I mean, that's probably unrealistic, right? But if you're right there, a couple points away from Ohio State, like you look at the average recruit ranking, it's right there. Like this is a class where if you stack 2, 3, 4 of these classes in a row, this is a team that could win, that has the profile from a talent perspective that can win a national title and compete with those teams in a 12-team playoff. And that's what you have to do. And that's what Dan's expectation is.
I didn't dive in too much into the numbers, but I thought they were close enough where if Jeremiah Smith would have flipped, like maybe Miami, Florida State, Oregon possibly could have gone up into the top spot, right? Obviously because of the number one player in the country, even though Ohio State had a really good class outside of that. But I digress. Still a great
And Smith still hasn't sent in his papers,
That's
so
true.
that still could happen.
Yeah.
And then Oregon also has a potential or likely commit coming tomorrow. So I think the combination of those two, I haven't run the numbers recently, but the combination of those two could still land Oregon, ahead of Ohio State. But again, at that point, you're splitting hairs. It's a tie.
Let's talk about their defense.
Ohio State's ahead.
Yeah, let's talk about their defense, because defense was the name of the game in terms of this recruiting class. You throw in guys like Aiden Breland out of Mater Dei, right, in California at 6'5", 290, number 16 player in the country. Elijah Rushing, very athletic but also big, 6'6", 251 out of Arizona. They take the top player in the state of Washington in Braden Platt. It wasn't super defense heavy last year. You had Mateo Uiagalelei as a part of that class, but what were kind of your thoughts and takeaways from the defensive side of the ball in this class?
Yeah, last year's class was a little bit more heavy numbers-wise on the offensive side. And I think on the defensive side, what you saw last year was cornerback, they hit well, and defensive line. They had 7 blue-chip players on the defensive line last year. And then this year it was all about, again, stocking the cupboard, right? Dan's always going to recruit defensive front 7 guys. I think one thing that was lacking in last year's class was at the linebacker position. It's a position that needed to be restocked in this class. So you mentioned Braden Platt, but also Kamar Matudi and Dylan Williams. All 3 are top 25 linebackers nationally in this class. So getting 3 of the top 25 to really bolster that linebacker position going into the future is huge. And then again, the defensive line. You always need to stack talent at the defensive line, particularly in the West. There are not very many defensive line bodies in the West Coast. There's very few. And Oregon is getting all the best of them. They got all the best of them last year, and they were able to get, like you said, Aiden Breland out of LA. They were able to get Elijah Rushing out of the Phoenix area, and potentially the Jericho Johnson is committing tomorrow. All the crystal balls favor Oregon. That's a nose tackle type body on the West Coast. Then you add in guys like they're also pulling in like Xavier Sims out of Missouri, and Teon McGray out of Missouri, and Xavier Sims out of the East Coast, right? So they're stacking that defensive line body type on top of what they brought in last year. And honestly, that's something that nobody else out West is doing. Certainly not USC, certainly not Washington, not at that level of depth and top line talent. So it's what you need to compete in the Big 10 or Big 18 now, if you want to call it that. So, and I think that's what Dan and nationally, which really is where Dan is trying to compete, right? This is a national program trying to compete at a national level. And if you don't have defensive front, if you don't have a defensive line, you don't have linebacker talent, you're not winning anything at that level.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I kind of said, I've been saying this for a while. I think both West Coast 4, traditional 14 kind of meet somewhere in the middle. Defense lines, that kind of thing needs to be more maybe on the West Coast. Teams like, the Iowas of the world need to get better on the offensive side of the ball as well. Let's talk about the quarterback position. Big offseason so far since the season has ended. You're going from Bo Nix to Dylan Gabriel, and then in theory from Dylan Gabriel to Dante Moore. So you got your quarterback room figured out 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then you got Achilles Smith Jr. right now committed for the class of 2025. Do you anticipate Oregon in the next year or two going after a big name quarterback? Once again, you see people kind of stack quarterbacks. Sometimes they enter the portal. I'm just curious what you think, how Oregon is going to approach that in the next couple of years, considering things look pretty solidified.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback has been a position that Oregon has struggled to recruit and develop internally since Justin Herbert, and that has been for a couple reasons. One, they've had a constant turnover of coaching, especially at the offensive coordinator, quarterback coach position. They've not had the same coordinator for more than 2 years in a row. So that continual cycle of the offensive coordinator, it makes it challenging to recruit and develop a quarterback, right? And then obviously they've had some head coaching turnover in there as well. And then so the guys they have landed either, were lower rated guys who maybe, didn't have the potential to begin with, or maybe a guy like Ty Thompson, who's been here 3 years, been through a couple different staffs, and for whatever reason just hasn't, clearly the coaching staff didn't think he was the next guy up, because like you said, they went out to replace Bo Nix. They got Dylan Gabriel, who's a plug and play 1-year starter. And then honestly, pulled off a coup that any coaching staff in the country would be jealous of, is that not only are you able to bring in Dylan Gabriel for next year, you're able to go in to get Dante Moore out of UCLA, former 5-star, former Oregon commit, who flipped late in the cycle last year. He's only got 1 year. He's only played 1 year at UCLA. Obviously, he had an up and down year there, but the talent is there. The potential is there. And so you get him to come in as a second transfer quarterback in the same class behind Dylan Gabriel and be willing to sit a year, learn the system, learn from Gabriel, and then maybe he's the guy for 25 and 26. And then, like you said, you've also got Austin Novosad sitting there. He's going to be probably your third quarterback this year. You got a Luke Moga, who they just signed in this class. Those are depth plays right now. Maybe they develop and maybe they, or maybe they move on, just because that's the era we're in now with the portal, right? But then you mentioned Achilles Smith Jr., legacy, right? His father played for the Ducks. Huge season for the Ducks back in 1999, went on to the NFL from there. So it certainly seems like if you go from Gabriel to Moore, maybe Moore plays 1 year, maybe he plays 2 years as the starter, 25 and 26, and then ideally you've got Achilles Smith ready to go, right? So that seems to give you a lot of runway. But as we know, things are fluid, especially at the quarterback position. So you never know where you can't project out too far. But the point being, they've built that room and that commitment list to say, like, we don't have this problem anymore where they've had the last 4 years, whereas, oh crap, we have to get a portal quarterback just to be viable. Right, at least now you've got something in the cupboard.
Yeah, ask USC how fluid the quarterback position can get. Thinking you maybe got something in Malachi Nelson, but of course he enters the transfer portal. I kind of want to leave you on this note, a little bit of a hypothetical as well. The whole Dante Moore circle. Almost a year to the day when he flipped to UCLA, he's coming back to Oregon. Hypothetically, you think if Dante Moore stays, despite the departure of Kenny Dillingham, you think if Dante Moore stays, do you think he's a starting quarter? Would he have been the starting quarterback, do you think, in 2024? I know there's a lot of factor, but, I'm just curious what you think of that.
Yeah, no, it's something. Someone else posed that question's been posed quite a bit. Would he be ready to go this year? Would they have not gone out and gotten Dylan Gabriel? Who knows? He would have been sitting behind Nix. He would have been learning the system. Right. I think, quite frankly, probably getting better quarterback development and coaching than he got at UCLA this year. However, the flip side of that is, what if Oregon thinks he's not ready? They go out and get Gabriel anyway, and then he transfers out, right? So maybe it all worked out for the best for the Ducks, and time will tell ultimately on Dante Moore and if he's able to realize that his immense potential. But at the worst case, if you're Oregon this year, that's a heck of a backup quarterback to have. Oh, yeah. He's a guy who's played a lot of snaps last year, started a lot of games, started half their games. And so if something were to happen to Gabriel, you're not going to a true freshman or a redshirt freshman who's never seen the field. You're actually going to a guy who's got, not only the talent, but some experience as well. I wanted to answer the question you've been asking everyone else about the transfer portal or the signing day. The signing day.
Let's do it. Yeah, that's right. That's right. What do you I think go back. What's old is new again. I'll put it back to February. What are your thoughts?
I'm kind of with the guy you had on last and asked that question too. I think there's a reason they moved it, because it was causing a lot of problems with high school recruits who wanted to lock in. They got tired of the process. I'm actually of the other mind. Move it to August. Move the early day to August. The kids who are ready to lock in have picked their, because a lot of kids are committing in spring and summer now. You see a lot of commitments in June, a lot of commitments in July. So I'm kind of the mind, if you don't want to do it in December, and I understand the reasonings against that, especially with the expanded playoffs and all the stuff that's going on now, move it to August, end of August. Let kids who are ready to lock in then, and then they can go into play their senior season and not have to deal with this stuff.
Would you change the transfer portal? Because right now the portal window after the season in December, would you move that at all, or would you kind of keep that? Or
I really don't think you can, because of the academic windows. The kids have to be they need to be in school at their new location in the 1st of January. So I don't really know how you could move that.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, Doug, when fans from your in-state rival in Corvallis aren't giving you free advertising on Twitter, what else are you doing these days? Where can people find you?
So certainly at QB11 Show on Twitter. Follow us there. We release at least a couple episodes a week. We'll probably dial it down to one or so a week as we get, for now, let's keep it at two. But we go all year round there. We just actually put out our season review with popular and analyst Hithliday, who charts all the games for all the Pac-12 schools. So we did 2 hours of that. The offensive episode came out last week. Defense will come out next week. We actually just released about an hour ago our signing day episode with Justin Hawkins from Scoop Duck, and so that was 2 hours of deep diving into every single commit in the class, so all 25 plus the potential one coming tomorrow. So that's where you can find us. You can find us on Twitter and on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're looking for it. QB11 Show. Appreciate that.
All right, Doug, thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we'll hook up sometimes, maybe a few times this offseason as we get ready for the first season of Oregon in the Big Ten Conference.
Yes, one more thing.
One more thing.
How awesome was it as an Oregon fan and as a fan of USC and UCLA and Washington to actually watch our network cover signing day? We've never had our network cover signing day in the past.
That's right. Yeah.
On signing day, the Pac-12 would televise like water polo or reruns of women's cross country. So we actually had a 4-hour TV show on the Big Ten Network today. My coach was on there. It was awesome. I am so excited to be joining a real conference. I cannot wait. It's almost here.
Yeah, you were talking about that on Twitter, and I was curious your thoughts. And there you go, 4 hours. I was watching the whole thing all day, kind of prepping for this. So thanks again, Doug, for joining us here.
Thank you. Take care.
That is Doug Scott from the QB11 Show, all things Oregon over there. All right, let's move on. Let's go up a highway that I do not know the number of because I don't live out west. I live in the great state of Minnesota. I am now pleased to be joined by my guy. We're talking Washington Huskies recruiting. It is signing day. We are joined now by Roman Tomashaw, Locked On Huskies, as well as Sports Illustrated and Fansided over there. You know, I don't know if we can say a ton about Michigan State anymore. They're doing pretty good so far this offseason. So, you know, that's usually been the tradition when Roman and I get together. You know, Washington played Michigan. It's just but Jonathan Smith, of course, the coach that you're familiar with over there in the Pac, doing some good things over there. All right, so we've got signing day done in the books. Washington kind of, last time I checked, somewhere towards the middle of this 18-team Big Ten. What were kind of your overall thoughts in terms of this signing class?
Well, Ted, first of all, great to see you.
Yeah.
And then one of the first things, it's the 5 freeway. Anybody up here in Seattle says that it says I-5, but I'm from Los Angeles, and anything that runs through the great state of California is before the freeway. So I just want to get that out there. But yeah, no, this has been a really interesting signing day so far. So 15 of Washington's 16 high school prospects have committed. The only one that's outstanding right now is 4-star defensive lineman Dominic Kirks, who's from Ohio. Looks like Ohio State might be like making a late push. We'll see a little bit more about that as we go along here. But I don't know how that one's going to play out. I've heard some conflicting things over the last couple of days. But this has been a really interesting class for the Huskies, where they're building, especially along the defensive line. We've seen 4 really impressive defensive line recruits. While the ratings might not necessarily reflect that, I think that has been one of the highlights of this class for me personally.
I got you. Yeah. And that's kind of an area. And I know this day is mostly about high school players, but you also got to talk about transfers. So let's talk about BJ Green here for just a minute. That's a transfer that just came into this program as well from Arizona State. And that seems like a pretty big ad. Of course, Braylon Trice, you got to find a way to kind of replicate that on this Washington line. How big of an ad in the transfer side of things was BJ Green from Arizona State?
Oh, yeah, no, he was an absolutely massive ad. Yeah. And he actually is the one transfer that has not signed his NLI just yet. So we're still waiting to see on that one. Doesn't sound like anything's going on there. It just he has not signed and sent that in yet. But he's going to be a massive ad, not just on the edge, but I think he's going to play a lot along the interior of the formation, especially in obvious passing downs. And he's somebody who PFF has him rated in the top 10 overall transfers available. And so I was really impressed with watching him last year. Last year, he wreaked so much havoc on the Huskies. Actually, also the last time they lost a game was that same day, thanks in part to what BJ Green was able to do. So I'm really intrigued by that ad, and I think that he's going to play a huge part in the pass rush this season. And there's going to be just a lot of things that are changing along the defensive line, and him and somebody who we're going to become familiar with in the Sugar Bowl, Zach Durfee, a transfer from Sioux Falls who hasn't been able to play yet this year because of the NCAA, are going to be future pieces for the Huskies that are really exciting to watch.
So a big question for a lot of people going forward. It's crazy because we're thinking about 2024, but Washington still has a chance to take home a national championship. That's just the way the calendar works nowadays. But, with this wide receiver room, I was kind of looking this up the other day. You look at Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk, all these guys could maybe third round or higher possibly in the NFL draft. How do you replace that kind of production? You got Justice Williams in this class. It looks like you got Jason Robinson, a couple of 3-stars as well. How do you think, is it in the future? Are these guys that I just mentioned going to play a role? Is it mostly going to be transfers that are going to try to fill the void of what is probably the best wide receiver room in America?
So that's a really good question because there's so many layers to that. The first one being Jason Robinson and Justice Williams are two incredibly impressive prospects. I ratings, as we know, are can be very, very weird at times. Justice specifically, the fact that he's not a 4-star is honestly wild to me, in my opinion. He's legit 6'4", measures in at 205, 210 pounds, and is just so impressive to watch on film too. I love everything that I've seen from him so far. He's just a force physically, and I don't necessarily know if he's going to play a role this next year, but he's definitely somebody that I'm going to watch. Jason Robinson is a fantastic route runner. Really impressed with his film as well. I think he's going to just really be a force in the slot. And then the high school side of things is not done yet either. Yeah. Four-star wide receiver Aaron Butler has yet to make his commitment. And from sources that I've talked to, I wouldn't be surprised if Washington is still the leader to secure his services by Friday if he decides to sign in the early period. So that's the high school side of things. Then on the transfer side, if they are able to take Aaron Butler's commitment, I don't think that we're going to see a transfer receiver come in, but with Jeremy Bernard, Giles Jackson coming back, who's been really good. He's solid. He just was limited this year due to injury. And somebody who I'm really high on personally, redshirt freshman Denzel Boston, who just, when you're in a room with a whole bunch of other NFL wide receivers, you're not necessarily going to get a ton of playing time. So you can't necessarily fault him for that. And then they brought in a really impressive class last year of 2 4-star receivers in Tayshaun Lyons and Rasheed Williams, and 3-star Keith Reynolds, who's a really, really nice athlete. I like that pickup a lot. So there's still a lot of talent in this wide receiver room.
Where do you see Washington kind of fitting in from a macro level in terms of their recruiting as a whole? Do they kind of fit in somewhere middle of the road in the Big Ten, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, something like that, on a consistent basis kind of going forward is what I'm talking about, and then fill in with transfers? Or how do you kind of project where this team kind of fits in the Big Ten recruiting-wise?
So I don't ever think it's necessarily going to be a top 15, top 10 class kind of thing. Yeah. But the guys that they're always going to take are they rely a lot more on film than they do on rankings, I would say. Right. Where we've seen this for years with this program, where a lot of the guys you can point to weren't necessarily the most sought after recruits. My personal favorite player of all time is Vita Vea. Vita Vea was an unheralded, unrecruited 3-star who played running back at 280 pounds and comes to Washington, becomes an All-American, is one of the best nose tackles in football. So that's always kind of been the Washington mentality where, they can get a top 20 class. And that's the fruits of the top 20 class labor is paying off with this team right now, because that's what 2019 and 2020 were for Chris Peterson. So there's still going to be a lot of work to be done on the high school side. I think 2025 is going to be a huge year on the high school side. And then as you said, there's still going to be transfers that are going to be just kind of peppered in here and there. But the last couple of years, they've been really heavily reliant on the portal for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes it's all about, this is the thing with high school recruiting and transfer portal now is, it used to be so simple, right? It was just a high school class and we try to recruit as best we can. But now there's so many different ways to build a roster where it's, hey, if you're Washington, you have a top 20 class, a top 25 class yearly, like what you could throw Wisconsin, Nebraska's, maybe Iowa, something like that into that schedule. But then you really look and you be able to hit the Michael Penix Juniors and people like that. Then maybe you can kind of stack your roster that way as well. Let's talk about the quarterback position. You're going to have Will Rogers this year for a year. Austin Mack is in the quarterback room, but also signed this year is DeMarcius Davis. Where does he kind of fit in with Austin Mack in the picture in terms of the quarterback in the future for the Huskies?
So he brings a really different skill set to the table. That's the first thing when it comes to Davis, where he's a little bit more of a runner. He's got a really impressive arm. It's not necessarily Austin Mack has just elite, out of this world arm talent. Got to see him a little bit at practice in the fall, and he's so impressive for a kid who's still 17 years old, mind you. He reclassified to enroll and did a really good job. Kalen DeBoer had some really nice things to say about him at his signing day press conference today. And so Austin Mack is kind of primed to be the QB of the future. And then It seems like they really like what they have at Davis. They already have a 2025 quarterback commit in Jackson Collick, and we'll kind of see how that one plays out. But I think that DeMarcius Davis brings a really different skill set to this roster with his ability to run the football, where Austin Mack is mobile enough to run at times. But I was just saying this to my co-host on over on Locked On Huskies, where one of the things that you can do with DeMarcius Davis, if he reaches a ceiling, is you can call more design run plays for him, which is something that we have not yet seen with Kalen DeBoer's staff.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's true. And what's your thoughts on kind of Will Rogers? I thought, we'll kind of finish up with this. Will Rogers, he's got if Polk and Bernard, maybe they could, Merriweather, right, from Notre Dame has kind of been rumored to possibly come to Washington. If they can reload that wide receiver, Will Rogers, like you look at when he was doing things under Mike Leach in that system, he had some of the best numbers in all of college football. Like, what are your thoughts on Will Rogers possibly coming? Can he, get into that Michael Penix, and this level is going to be crazy for anybody in all of college football. But what are kind of your thoughts, your final thoughts here about Will Rogers coming in next year?
Yeah, I'm really high on Will Rogers. I think that he's a really good fit for this system. I think that watching him in this offense is going to be, appreciate you, Sergeant Pickles. It's awesome. Love it. But I think that's one thing that's really interesting is just the way he fits into the system, because we saw him struggle this year. We also saw him get hurt, but we saw him struggle this season in a very different offense, where I think that one of the best things about Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb, and this coaching staff is even through just over 2 years, I'm already at the point where if they identify a quarterback and they say, this is the guy we want, we really like this guy, the entire time, I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to say, that's fine. I understand, and I trust your evaluation of this, because every single quarterback we've seen them evaluate and be really high on has turned into a really special prospect. We talk about Avery Johnson at Kansas State, was one of the first guys they pushed really hard for. Aiden Childs, who just transferred to Michigan State. Yeah. See, can still get a Spartan shout out in there in some way, shape, or form. So those were two of the guys that they identified really early on. Austin Mack identified really early on in the process. If he stayed for his senior year and signed with this class, we might be talking about him in the same breath that we're talking about Dylan Raiola, who signed with Nebraska, because he is just that talented. Yeah. So whoever this staff wants at quarterback, I think that they're going to be just fine.
That's true. I'm excited to see what Washington can possibly do. We've also got a guy, Kraken Hawk, giving a shout out to you, Roman, as well. We've got some Roman lovers in the chat here tonight. We might get together talking about this college football playoff game coming up pretty soon. But quickly, before I'll give you the quick last thought before you go. I think Washington has an advantage against that Texas secondary. I think the Texas defensive line is pretty stout. Curious to see how Dylan Johnson and that running game can do. Well, give me your elevator speech and how you think Washington can possibly win the Sugar Bowl.
So it's just that. It's if Washington is able to control the line of scrimmage, their offensive line, I was on a Texas show last week where people were underestimating redshirt freshman center Parker Brailsford, who has been so impressive, and he's as strong as anybody. So if they can control the line of scrimmage, and it's not just if they can beat Texas secondary, which we know is possible. We saw them do it last year. But the biggest thing for me is if the defense plays the way that it did in the Pac-12 championship game against Oregon, where we saw them have their best all-around game in a very long time. We saw them tackle really well. We saw them do all those things. Then the sky's the limit for this team, and there's absolutely a shot that they can win a national championship.
Just pretend you're playing Oregon, because they play really well when they're playing Oregon.
Yes.
Just to pretend you got the wings and everything on the helmet and all that, and they'll be good. All right, Roman, where can people find you? Where can people see your show? It's your time to shine.
Yeah, I'm at all forms of social media at rtomashov34. You can check out Locked On Huskies on YouTube. Feel free to drop subscribe on there. We update that channel every single day with new stuff. We are always just round the clock busting our butts to make sure that we've got the best Husky content out there. And then all our written work is at Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. And you can find that at si.com/college/Washington. Check us out over there. Again, just updating that with new content every single day.
All right, Roman, thanks for being here, and we might get together pretty soon to talk about this playoff game against Texas.
Hope so. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. All right, folks, we've got one more. We've got one more in the queue, and we are staying out on the West Coast. It might be a little bit rainy out there in Seattle, but it rains a little bit less where we're about to go to next, and we are pleased to be welcomed now by our guy Tim Prangley from the Trojan Conquest program over there. Tim, it's great to talk to you. It's great to be with you. It's good to talk some Trojan recruiting class here today. What was kind of your overall thoughts on USC's class here in 2024?
Any Trojan out there is telling you they're not a bit disappointed in this recruiting class is going to be lying to you. Then again, any Trojan out there saying they're not disappointed in the season and how it went down would be lying to you. And to see how these things, work out, kind of hard to flip guys when you come off of a 7-5 season, especially the guys that you want to flip are defensive players. Kind of hard to sell something that's unknown, untested. Bringing in Lynn and Entz were huge, and Belk, huge situations for USC, but obviously they're going to have to show it on the field before you're going to see the 4- and 5-star guys committing to come to USC. And then as usual, we have our lovely friends up north with some good NLI money that decided to come on in and make some adjustments as they've done with Connerly, as they did last year with Uyungale, and now the latest one you have with Pelham earlier. Yeah, so, hats off to them. They've got they've got a great program selling a lot of great things up there. I'll put it that way.
Let's kind of branch off of that a little bit. Weird, because you talk about name, image, and likeness. That's a big deal, of course, when you're talking about these big time players. When you talk about these last minute flips, right? Dylan Raiola was kind of a big one for Nebraska. That was a big part of the flip from Georgia. What's kind of your thoughts on the current status of USC's collective and kind of where it ranks as they head to the Big Ten, where there is some pretty good NIL money flowing around?
Well, there's been a number. It's like a lot of different universities. It's some schools hit the ground running, shall we say, with the whole collective situation.
Sure.
Other schools like USC, Michigan to a smaller extent, kind of were a little bit late to the game rolling into it, and it has shown. But when Jen Cohn came in, one of the things she said is she's going to get more aggressive. USC, and maybe it's because they're a little bit shy of what the NCAA loves to do to USC over the decades, was a lot less aggressive when it comes to inducing. I didn't say inducements, inducing young people to come to your university, and rightfully so. And so you've seen some of the collectives like you have, up in Oregon and Miami and Texas A&M.
Yeah.
They're very aggressive, and it's been very effective for them. And and their class rankings have reflected as much.
I just feel like we're in such a weird spot where we're all still trying to pretend that this is still amateurism. We're in a weird kind of middle. Okay, yeah, players can get paid now, but it's like people are still trying to pretend that we're not, offering $1 million, $2 million for a kid, and even kids that haven't entered the portal as well. That's a whole different type of discussion as well. Let's talk about. So you are a University of Southern California alumnus. You are also an alumnus of St. John Bosco, if I'm not mistaken myself. You got a 4-star corner coming in Marcellus Williams into this class from St. John Bosco as well. I watched a little bit on him as well. It always seems like he's in the right spot on the field. Great reaction to the play going on in front of him, whether it's kind of a smaller guy, but he still does a pretty good job in coming up and run support. What was kind of your thoughts? I'm not sure if you were able to see him in person or not, but what was kind of your thoughts on Marcellus Williams? And now he's going to become a Trojan.
Great bloodlines. Both his brothers played. One brother, his name escapes me, played at ASU. His brother Max has been at USC impacting, I think second on the team last year in tackles. And until his injury, he was right in the mix of it here at USC this year. But I think it was Max who said he's the best of all three of us. So that bodes well. You said I'm a Bosco alum, so I go to all the Bosco games. And what I really like about him is not only is he athletic, fluid, but he's tough. He's big. He'll get up in there as far as press coverage, but also if he's got to come up in the hole and make a tackle, he's right there. He's quick to make that happen. Really excited. Again, of all the guys on the team, he's the one I'm most excited to see wearing cardinal and gold next year.
So everybody knows it. Defense needs to get better, right? That's why Alex Grinch did not make it to Christmas, right? That's why DeAnton Lynn is coming from across town. That's why Matt Entz is coming from Fargo. That's why all these things are happening. This class, you got Cameron Fountain in there as well on the defensive side of the ball. What do you feel this class, and we can talk about transfer portal stuff because I think they've been doing some good things. Got a couple of brothers or cousins, somebody related coming over from Oregon State. Talk about what they've been able to do high school and transfer-wise on the defensive side of the ball that if you have optimism, or if it's not optimistic, kind of talk about what they're doing, try to improve that defense.
Well, in reverse order, if we talk about the transfer portal, they brought in, although they're not blood brothers, they're brothers, and they're a mixed family. You got Akili Arnold coming at safety, and Easton Mascarenas Arnold. He's a linebacker. He's of the two is kind of a little more touted. Both of them solid veteran players, going to add some stability to this team on defense, especially. They came from that Oregon State defense, which is pretty damn stout the last couple of years. They've got a number of reps between the two of them, tackle very well. I think that Easton actually had north of 100 tackles last year. So, these guys come in with a lot of experience and a lot of talent. And then as far as on the recruiting side of it, a couple of really athletic guys. They might be a bit raw, might need a little bit. They won't be starting as freshmen, I don't believe, but they are super. You brought up Cameron Fountain, who the entire SEC was after. And really good, that fact that Manning was able to lock it down and get him and to maintain his commitment to stay at USC, going to Atlanta, Georgia, and pulling him out of there and bringing him to the West Coast was a huge coup. He's got to pack on some size, and weight, so he's going to be a little bit of a project, but absolutely all the ability in the world to get to that backfield. It's going to be amazing. And then they just signed Carlin Jones also. Big pickup for that. I mean, we're adding some bulk because Riley did say, he said, everything we do here going forward, is going to make this an elite defense. And he's shown it as far as like you just broke down the coaching staff they brought in, right, as well as if you look at the transfer portal, you look at the emphasis they have on the recruiting, it absolutely looks like it is on the defensive side of the ball. A guy a lot of people don't know about that I'm excited about, guy flies around a lot, is 6'3", 210 Elijah Newby. He's from Connecticut. I guarantee you if this kid was in the South or Texas or California, a lot more people would know about him. A little bit, again, another project-ish where you're going to put on some weight, maybe not a freshman contributor, but he definitely is a guy that can flash and will be pretty amazing for USC. Oh, and one more guy. Talk about flashing. Talk about contributing. Marquise Gallegos is a guy, is a safety. Now, we're starting to pack. We're starting to load up. We got a pretty good safety room, but this kid, his film, he's just a ball hawk, and he just gets to the ball, breaks on the ball. Good tackler, sound tackler. Can't wait to see him also in Cardinal and Gold.
Yeah, you talk about safeties. I can't, Chris, because I'm just waiting on Will Howard right now. I'm just waiting, so I'm kind of focused on that. Yeah. So I know there's a couple others. I can't remember. I know Kamari Ramsey was in at a few of these Big Ten schools. I don't think he committed to USC yet, but of course coming over from UCLA, that would be kind of a big get for the Trojans.
I'm hearing he also. That's what I'm saying. That's that safety room. Sure. You know, we got some dudes in our safety room. Even if we do lose Kalen Bullock, which I think most likely, I guess, reports worthy he hasn't been at any of the bowl practices, so safe to say he's probably gone. But I do like what USC does have. Last year during the spring game, we got to see a guy named Christian Pierce, long, lanky guy. Reminds me a lot of Kalen Bullock, maybe a young Kalen Bullock. He's at a year in now. It's be a second year. Be interesting to see what Lynn, as a safety guy, can do with him.
So you kind of talked about it at the top, where this is not, I mean, they're ranked 19th, 20th, depending on the service, somewhere in there in terms of overall in the country. It's still top 5 of the Big Ten, still pretty solid as far as the conference is concerned, but you're saying a little bit of a bummer in terms of, this was a top 10 class last year. All right, you look at Zachariah Branch. This kid's going to be a superstar. I think he's going to be a superstar in the Big Ten. I think he's going to be one of the most electric players eventually when he you look at Deuce Robinson, Malachi Lemon, Quentin Joyner possibly as well. The big thing today was obviously the loss of Ryan Pelham. Does the Ryan Pelham loss sting less considering all of those players, those skill players that you were able to pick up last year, or does it still sting a good amount because you obviously want to be able to stack as many of those players as possible?
He stings because, twofold. I mean, one, Pelham's just an incredible receiver. He's a really good. I think he's underrated. I think he's a very, very, very good receiver. And the fact that not only do we lose him, but he goes up to Oregon, right? So then he goes to now. We don't face Oregon next year, and the way things going, who knows? Maybe he'll hit the portal in a year, and we'll never face him. The way things go, you never know. But in general, Oregon got a good one. There's no way to really candy coat that. But I'm more high on Xavier Jordan. That's not any like sour grapes. I think Xavier Jordan's just a special receiver, 6'1", 165. Again, it's just fast and quick. Can get up and go get the ball, high point the ball. But then going back to last year, it's like you brought up, Oregon's Ohio State lost somebody to Oregon as well. It's USC's right there with them. I know you called them wide receiver U, but USC is also pretty much throughout history has been also a dominant force in wide receivers, especially recently with our NFL production alone. But also bringing in guys last year, like you said, special guys like Makai Lemon, who no one's really seen yet. There's question if he's going to be on the deep playing corner because he played both over at Los Alamitos. He played both corner and wide receiver. He's a special talent. But what I really want to see in this bowl game, I hope it does happen, is Deuce Robinson, and also a guy that maybe he's a big name. He's number 1 tight end, but he's definitely a wide receiver in USC system. Is another guy, Jacoby Lane, who's a big, tall kid, rangy, can jump out of the building. And then you talked about Zachariah Branch. Zachariah Branch. Our good friend Gabe over at the Trojan Blade, we talked about today, actually. We talked about today, and he said, and I agree with him, he's going to need to work on maybe his route running, a little bit, more of a polished receiver, because we know he's like a gadget guy. You give him the end around, flip it out in the flat, he's gone. Obviously on kick returns and special teams, he's awesome. But if he puts that together and he can work on that route running and you can get him the ball, it's going to be trouble. So, USC – the Pelham hurts because he's great. He goes a competitor, but overall, USC stacked.
Let's talk about the quarterback position. That's been something that's really been talking about and a little bit of buzz around this USC program. There was rumors they could possibly flip, what was it, DJ Galloway, I forgot his last name, something like that, from Florida, right? 5-star because of the transfer of Malachi Nelson. What was kind of your thoughts on that transfer right now? Of course, Will Howard, it seems like it's between maybe Miami and USC. It seems like it's a matter of time until the Trojans finally bring him in. He was on campus last weekend. You got Miller Moss, who's going to get sort of an audition, it seems like, of sorts in the Holiday Bowl. What is kind of your view of this quarterback room kind of going forward after the departure of Malachi Nelson?
Well, there were always some questions about how this was going to be handled because just the fact that the way Lincoln Riley has been, because they obviously they weren't, they weren't taking a quarterback in this class. They weren't actively recruiting. Well, early on, DJ Lagway, they were on him, but then we went to Florida and didn't seem like that was ever coming back. And the fact that they do they're waiting for Lewis, who's a 26 quarterback, but Julian Lewis, is he going to be there? Is he going to reclassify? I mean, 2-3 years is a long time. Also in recruiting, who knows if you can count on him? But in the immediate moment right now, it does hurt. But it is kind of weird. Like I said, I'm being in Southern California. Matter of fact, I live right down the street from Los Alamitos High School, so I've gone and watched him play. I watched him torch my Braves in playoffs, and along with Makai Lemon. And he can make all the throws accurate, seemed like he had a great pocket presence. He could move, get out of trouble, step up when he needs to. But I think he wanted to play immediately. So that's really, I mean, you look at what this rumored to be his initial choices of where he's going. He's like, look, I'm not going to sit around. I really do want to get out when I'm good. And today's NIL, getting out there and going to a school like a San Diego State, lighting it up there, you just open yourself up to maybe, in a couple of years when you graduate, going somewhere with another free transfer and lighting it up. I do think that the whole Will Howard thing is inevitable. It's going to happen very soon. And just if I heard it right, someone called or texted me and told me that Lincoln Riley was quoted as saying that they're going to be taking two, a younger and an older quarterback in the transfer portal. I'm assuming that the older one is Will Howard, who, by the way, going back to what we said, that everything going forward is going to have to do with the defense. Going into the Big Ten, it's going to be about time possession, helping at the defense. A big guy like Howard is going to go a long way to doing that. He's not like the kind of like a mobile guy like you have with Caleb Williams, but he can run the ball. And if he gets going, he's fast. But he's also 6'4", 240, I think. I don't know. So he's a big load, a big dude. And I think going into the Big Ten, that's going to be very, very beneficial. Who's the other younger guy? I know. Maybe it's a Malik Murphy. He's not going up to Ohio State. There's other guys out that are still available that are on the table. But I think USC, when it comes to wide receiver, when it comes to quarterback, with Lincoln Riley, I think we're always going to be okay. It's, maybe that defensive tackle position, inside linebacker. That's where I worry.
Right. That's when because Will Howard's been on the radar for Lincoln Riley pretty much ever since he entered the portal. At least it seemed that way. And here's the thing I will say about Lincoln Riley. When it comes to what he wants from a quarterback, I am in no position to doubt Lincoln Riley, right? Because of his track record. Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, all these guys kind of at the quarterback position. So if he says it's good, then I'm sure it's good. That's interesting about a younger transfer bringing in. That could maybe possibly answer some questions down the road as well. Defensive staff. Matt Entz was kind of one that was, I spent some time up in Fargo. That's where my first job was. So I spent some time around that North Dakota State program. I know what they're all about. Tough, very tough football program, hard-nosed type of football program. What was kind of your thoughts on Matt Entz kind of coming down to be the assistant coach or position coach on that defense?
Just what you just said. You think about those Bison defenses. They're just, tough, physical, don't mess around, gonna make you cry kind of defenses. And coming off of rightfully so or wrong, actually after last year, rightfully so, calling USC's defense, calling them out, calling them soft. If at least in just the messaging, bringing in a guy like Entz with his level of success, with his proven track record as a guy that's going to kick ass. I was talking with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire about the point that, we've been wondering about who's going to be back in the day when you had the older, when you had McKay and Robinson, you had a guy named Marv Goo, who was just like, he's your enforcer, your kick ass guy. And then going into Pete Carroll years, you had Coach Orgeron, who was just a big voice in the room and just yell and scream, right? We're wondering if this might be, he's a head coach, he's a DC, he's a linebacker coach. Usually defensive line coaches and linebacker coaches, they usually they're not the softest of gentlemen, you know what I mean? And we're wondering if with the culture that he continued on at North Dakota State, we're wondering if that's going to carry over to our side, not just on the defensive side of the ball, but also on the offensive side of the ball.
Where do you think the USC, as we kind of wind down here, where do you think USC stands as far as I know we got a long way to go. It's really going to be once we get to February-ish, I think is when we're really going to find out what these rosters really look like. It's going to get clearer and everything. Where do you think that this USC, do you feel pretty confident of where this team is as they approach their first year in the Big Ten? Do they have a ways to go? Where do you kind of feel as of this moment because this is kind of really the jumping off point, right? This is signing day. This is the time where you're putting your future together. This is kind of the start of everything. Where do you feel about the future as they move into this conference?
There is a level of optimism here at SC. I'm sure of it. Again, rededicating itself on the defense side of the ball. Yep. It does seem like because the question was, okay, it's great. Coaches say stuff all the time, but is he really going to toughen this unit up? Are we to get bigger? And that's been the message. Benny Wiley, strength and conditioning coach, said, look, in the past, it's been, we want this guy, that guy. We want this happen here. He said, no, it is clear. We are not joining the medium 10. We're joining the Big 10. He says everyone here across the board is going to get bigger. Bring in guys. Our offensive line, it was kind of they were lowly. They were lower ranked. They were 3-star guys, right, and maybe really high star 3-star guys, but not really quite. The highest level we had was the Elijah Page left tackle. But I'm really excited to see what these 5 guys, Page, Taulele, Banuelos, Noah, and Raymond. These guys have all not just the frames, but now they got the size. If that unit can come together going into the Big Ten, I know that Lincoln Riley's shown. We say, if he has a quarterback. No. It looks like now I would say to you, look at Riley's offensive line. Because last year, there was a difference between – there's a reason why – Caleb Williams brought his offensive line with him to the Heisman Trophy celebration, where he took them everywhere. Why? Because these guys were a huge part of his success. I think USC, if that line is what I think it's going to be, if I think that Lynn is not, what we saw last year is not some one-year hit wonder, I think that USC has the ability to make some noise. Does it have the roster at this point to make a run at Ohio State and Michigan? I looked at Michigan. Their recruiting class, they're not known for exactly lighting up the high school recruiting classes either.
So they don't, you're not going to get a top 5, top 7, that type of class. You're not going to go to Ohio State consistently recruits above Michigan. Michigan recruits a ton of 4-stars. That's just where they are right now, and develop this. Yeah, JJ McCarthy, I guess, was a 5-star and some kind of a lower 5-star, high 4-star, depending on where you look at it there. But yeah, that's kind of where Michigan is. They just do a really good job is recruiting a bunch of those really good 4-star players and then developing them into kind of all conference and all American players as well. And maybe that can happen with this USC class, right? Where there's a decent amount of 4-stars in this class, and maybe they can develop them to get to that point. Because here's maybe I'll kind of spin this back towards you, because D'Anton Lynn, 1 year at UCLA. Before that, he was all in the NFL jobs right there. And I will claim a little bit of ignorance. I'm not sure what UCLA's defense was like the year before that, or maybe year or 2 years before that. My question to you is, and maybe you would obviously kind of know more about UCLA's defense a couple of years back, because that was a great UCLA, the Latu and all those guys were great. Can this thing flip at USC like it could flip at UCLA, or it did this past season?
Yeah, Bill McGovern was there the year before.
Okay.
And unfortunately, actually, he ended up passing away last year, dying. It was very ill when he got there. So halfway through the season, it was a rudderless ship. But that rudderless ship did finish like 80th or 90th in defense, and then we saw what they did last year. So yeah, absolutely, there was a turnaround. But it is Lynn. I mean, he comes from, his pedigree is unquestioned. He came to UCLA. Chip Kelly with John Harbaugh had the conversation, and basically said, yeah, I highly recommend you take a chance on this guy, and he did. It comes from a Rex Ryan tree. I mean, the defense, his bona fides are all there. He might be a young guy, and he's never been. He's only 1 year as a defensive coordinator, but he's been in football, almost immediately. He's been in the NFL coaching at some level for a number of years, so he is well seasoned. Was it because no one had really seen his defense before? There wasn't a lot of film on. There's all kinds of reasons why it was. And you can talk about the Latu effect, because and the Murphy brothers. I mean, there was talent on that team he brought together. And I will say to you, there is talent on USC's defense. Yeah. Whatever the Grinch was doing for the last 2 years, I mean, there are unnamed sources just talking all kinds of mess about how USC just could be fooled easily. They were very undisciplined, and I said that after the UCLA game. The one thing coming away from it, I said, man, that defense is disciplined. They don't go for any of the eye candy. They know their assignment and they stuck to it. And if I'm getting excited thinking about it. If Lynn can do that with the talent USC does have on defense, absolutely, there could be a huge turnaround from in year one.
I forgot who was saying this. It might have been Gabe or somebody. I feel like somebody said it was a complex. Who knows? It might have been even you. I can't even remember. The scheme with Grinch was very complex. Is what I heard. I don't know how accurate or inaccurate that is, and maybe simplifying things. I don't know if D'Anton Lynn is going to do that, or how much simpler or maybe more complicated he's going to make things. But that's kind of what I saw over there. Well, Tim, it's great to be with you again. I'll remind folks where they can find you, where they can see your shows and Twitter and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Twitter's easy. It's Tim_Prangley. And then same for Instagram. As far as shows go, you can count on Matt and myself being live every Friday, 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 Eastern for our call-in show, which is everyone's favorite show. It's literally where you guys are running the show. We're just there to answer questions. And it's a telephone call-in show that all fans, I have Oklahoma fans, I've got Oregon fans, Utah fans, they all call in. And we're all appreciated, and we'll take the show wherever you guys want to go. Then also after every home game, we have a post-game show that we do live right after the game. And then on Mondays, you can catch me for Trojan Conquest Live, Mondays at 8 o'clock Pacific, 11 Eastern.
And then quickly before you go, what's one thing you're looking for in this bowl game against Louisville that you really want to see from somebody to kind of make you feel a little bit better?
Let's see if Miller Moss can survive.
Right.
Well, first off, people, Louisville's talk about our defense. I mean, it's their offense. People, Braum is going to come at it. Now we've lost. I'm not sure who's going to be the interim DC, but whoever it is not going to be able. The adjustments, whatever game plan they have, is great coming in. That second half, Braum's going to make adjustments, and it's just, any Trojan fans out there that are thinking about a victory in this game, I'm very negative about it. Just go out, enjoy it. Hopefully we get to see some of the young guys play.
Yeah.
Our offensive line. Maybe we get some of those young guys we talk about on the offensive line out there.
Sure.
But it might be pretty brutal, guys.
All right, Tim, thanks for joining me. And I'm sure we'll connect soon here as this offseason and the first season of USC in the Big Ten Conference gets ever closer. Thanks again.
I always love talking to Ted, and talk to you soon. All
right, there's Tim Prangley from the Trojan Conquest program over there. So yeah, they do a good job, a call-in show over there talking all things USC. Well, signing day is officially in the book. So that kind of wraps up the show for tonight, but here's kind of what I want to talk about what's coming up. Friday night, we will likely be having a show talking about some of these early bowl games as well, featuring Big Ten and even a future Big Ten team. We got USC, right, playing in a bowl game that we just mentioned, the Holiday Bowl against Louisville. We got Minnesota and Bowling Green taking on each other in the Quick Lane Bowl. We've got Utah Northwestern. We're going to have a conversation with the West Lot Pirates talking about, that's a Northwestern podcast, talking about their bowl game against Utah. So we've got breaking down some of these early bowl games. It's almost Christmas around here. Then once we get after Christmas, we're going to really ramp it up in terms of talking about the college football playoff. And there's a lot of bowl games to cover. So we're probably going to be covering a lot of the bowl games that aren't playoff games. Those are probably going to be talking about in live shows where we're going to stack. We're going to preview 5 bowl games or something at a time, something like that. There's a lot going on, man. There is a lot happening in the world of college football. We still got some games, and we're going to be doing some pretty in-depth previews. Michigan taking on Alabama, okay, and then we've got Washington taking on Texas. So those are 2 massive games, one current Big Ten champion, one future team that hopes to be a Big Ten champion one day. You know what we're hoping for here at this channel. We're hoping for Michigan and Washington in that college football playoff national championship game in Houston, Texas. So Friday night, mark your calendars, 8 Eastern, 9 Eastern, one of those times is when we're really going to be coming on, talking about some of those early bowl games and some of the other happenings, like Chubba Purdy entering the transfer portal at Nebraska. There's how about Jayshon Barham, the linebacker from Maryland, right? The linebacker from Maryland transferring to Michigan. That was a pretty big deal. So we're going to cover some transfer, some of this other news, and then we're going to eventually get into some of those bowl games as well. So we will see you on Friday night. Until then, please take care of each other. But yeah, this has been Big Ten Ted Live special edition covering signing day. All things early signing day. The future is now within the Big Ten.